Right, Cameron's just come out of the picture. Good morning, everybody. My name's Claire Milne. This is the second hearing session. The first hearing session was held on Monday, so I covered quite a lot in that introduction, so I won't be covering that today. The webcast of that particular session is now available on our webcast part of the website, so you can view and get the details there. Before we get started, I'd just like to confirm who's taking part in the hearing session today and what will probably run into tomorrow as well. For the applicant, I have Douglas Armstrong, QC, and the witness is Ruth Morrison of ACOM. Is that correct? If you could just wave your hand if that's correct. Thank you. And for Highland Council, I have James Finley, QC, and I have Dr. Guy Wimble. Again, if you can just wave your hand, that's great, thank you. So we just have the 4 participants for this session. A couple of things to cover. On Monday, I touched on dates for submission of closing statements, and a couple of dates I put forward to the parties that were there who were agreeable to those dates. I just want to confirm that with the witnesses that are here today. So for the Highland Council, I indicated a date of the 14th of September for your submissions, your closing statements, and then for the applicant to follow that up on the 21st of September. Could you just indicate if you're happy with those dates, or if there are any problems with those dates? Could you just indicate by raising your hand and then maybe speaking?
That's fine for the Highland Council.
Thank you, Mr. Finley. Mr. Armstrong?
Happy with the date as discussed on Monday.
Okay, perfect, thank you. I will confirm that in the office from an email and any other matters that are needed at the end of the hearing session. Now, there's a document been submitted by the Highland Council. I think it came in yesterday. Unfortunately, I only received it this morning, and it's insert document 10, I think. And from just looking at the document this morning, there's been a little bit of correspondence, I think, from the applicant also. Am I right, Mr. Armstrong, that you're content for that, the whole of that document to be submitted?
Ma'am, it would have obviously been helpful to have seen it earlier than just last night, but I think it would be more logical to have the whole document rather than just extracts of it, because it is also easier to sort of, if we are going to go into it in any detail, it's I think it's helpful to have the whole document before you, ma'am, and I'm happy for that document to be lodged and given the Highland Council number. Under one proviso, though, that obviously we just got it last night, and our witness today is happy to address points today, but we haven't, well, I haven't had an opportunity to obviously speak to our forestry experts. And if any issues arise in a technical nature, if I could reserve my position that perhaps we could respond by way of a written submission in 7 days. But obviously, our witness today is able to deal with it from the landscape viewpoint and set out the background. But if there is any other matter that's of a more technical point, if I could reserve our position and we could respond within 7 days, dealing with any points in relation to that document if it is used in the discussions today.
When you say 7 days, 7 days from when would you be looking to submit a written submission on that?
It would be 7 days from today, so
okay.
That would be next Thursday. I'm sure it can be dealt with within that time scale, and I'd have thought by the time I sort of consulted, it could easily be dealt with by sort of Monday or Tuesday, but just to give everyone sort of some time, if we could make it 7 days.
Mr. Finley, do you have any comments on that in terms of taking the whole document and also the timescales for some written submissions?
Firstly, in terms of the whole document, we provided extracts, but also the whole document, just in case Mr. Armstrong wanted to take the position that he did. So we're very happy to have the whole document in. I should add that we're grateful to the applicant's side for accepting it in without argument at this stage, and I apologise for the late delivery, but it's a matter of, first of all, Dr. Wimble finding it and then me being available to discuss it with him. And as to the second point, I have no objection at all to Mr. Armstrong's suggestion, and that would give us sufficient time for me to be able to respond to any points that come up by way of our closing submissions due on the 14th.
Okay, that sounds a reasonable way forward. I'll note that down. Are there any further kind of practical or procedural matters before I get into the detail of the hearing session itself? Does anybody want to raise anything before we get started? Mr. Armstrong. I can't hear you, Mr. Armstrong. You'll need to unmute.
Sorry. Just a couple of points that really follow on from our session on Monday. The document that Catherine Anderson produced on Monday, I think now has a reference number, and that's ILI 9.95. That's the one sort of showing the 5 pointers to the early planting on figure 12.7 of the EIA report.
Okay.
Secondly, I think we'd indicated that we would produce the FES, the Future Energy Scenarios 2020, and we're in the process of doing that, and also just setting out where the various scenarios, what pages they're set out, and the equivalent to the page 133 that we discussed on Monday, and I understand that will be produced hopefully by Monday. And thirdly, a point that, Ma'am, that I think you raised on Monday at the start, but nobody followed up on. You asked about an indication in relation to the SSE objection and the cooperation agreement. I understand that the agreement, an agreement has been reached with SSE, and it's with them to sign, and that should be that they should be withdrawing their objection in the next couple of days. So that's just to update on that. But these were the only points that that I had that mainly follow on from Monday's hearing.
Yeah, I had those points as well. So just to note what you said there. So ILI 9.95 will be Catherine's document. She showed up on the screen there, marked up. The second point there is the FES Scenarios 2020. So that will be submitted on Monday. And Scottish and Southern Energy's objection. Yes, I did raise that at the beginning. I understood I had an email, I think it was a week or so ago, indicating that they were likely to withdraw, but we haven't had that yet. So if necessary, I can follow that up with them direct. But we will let the hearing run through and see if we get anything in the next couple of days. There was one further matter that I noted at the hearing session on Monday, and that was, and I don't know if you've picked up on this, but it was about the evidence that was being given by, I think, Mr. Hull at the time, and it was around the references and sources that had been used to look at the construction impacts when we were looking at the carbon emissions calculations. And I think he agreed that he would, by Monday, he would provide an interim level summary. That there's the facts and the figures, which is a lot of detail, but what we've got in the hearing statement is a very brief summary, but it was something that sat between those two to provide a bit more of a layer of information to translate that data into where it's got to in the very, very final summary. Do you recall that, Mr. Armstrong? Because I've made a note of that.
Yes, ma'am. That will be produced for Monday as well, and it's setting out that interim level and also saying where the source. People want to go to the source to see where the source has come from. Yes,
this was, I think, a point raised by Ms. Henderson as well. She was keen to understand where the figures and how they've been arrived at in the figures in the main hearing statement. So if we put a note that will be coming on Monday, also. But
it was certainly not the intention to produce all the spreadsheets, which I think would be very difficult for anybody to sort of fully understand.
Yes, I think we discussed that and we agreed that was probably not sensible to do that, but something in between, yeah. Which I think Mr. Hull said he thought he could do. So Okay, lovely, thank you. That's all I have then from Monday's session. I'll lead us into starting off hearing session 2. And what I intend to do, I circulated an agenda of questions similar to hearing session 1, which I thought we'd maybe work through in a sequence. It may be that we might need to jump around a little bit, but I'm hoping we can kind of stick to this structure. It'll certainly be easy for me to understand the points that the questions that I'm asking and the answers I want to get from these questions if we try and stick to the order that I've raised them. Now, I will be directing the questions to either the applicant or to the council, but I will give the other party an opportunity to come back on those points that are raised. Again, to avoid visual fatigue, and I must admit on Monday, I think it was quite tiring. I think the participants probably were quite tired at the end of the day. So I want to try and minimise that by having a maximum period of between 1.5 to 2 hours with some suitable breaks. So and I will try and keep an eye on the timescales. So today, ideally, we'll probably have two sessions and possibly small breaks, a good lunch in between, and a good lunch break, and then maybe a small break this morning. We'll see how we get on. We're starting a little bit earlier this morning, so it may be that I'll introduce a small 10-minute break. Anything that we don't conclude today will be carried over to tomorrow. So we've got another session scheduled for 9:30 tomorrow morning. Okay, if everybody's happy with those procedures, I think we'll make a start and we'll lead on to the questions. Just excuse me. Okay, I've put the questions under a number of headings. So the first thing I wanted to get into was really the methodology of the environmental assessment in looking at landscape and visual matters. I've then got a heading that covers impacts on landscape character, and quite a lot under visual impacts as well, which might take a bit of time to go through. So we'll see where we get to on that today. And then cumulative impacts, which might overlap a little bit with the assessment methodology when we're discussing it, but I want to confine the questions that I've got about the methodology to just the methodology rather than get drawn into the assessment of cumulative impacts. I want that to cover that later because I think that would be too much detail at this stage. And then finally, I've got mitigation and residual effects. I've got a couple of things under there that I want to cover as well, which will touch on the conditions. So when I get to question, I think 23, I will have some extra matters I want to cover under that with regard to the conditions. I'll leave that until we get to that. So under assessment methodology, first of all, I want to understand the extent to which the method of assessment is in dispute, if at all, and that's kind of key to my understanding here. In particular, in determining the levels of sensitivity, magnitude and effects. So this is a question that I'm directing at the Highland Council's witness. This is to Dr. Wimble. So how different are the assessment findings that have been made by Highland Council's witness compared with that in the environmental assessment report? Dr. Wimble.
Well, I don't think there's a huge amount of difference in the assessment. Well, first of all, I think maybe I should kill any queries about the fundamental disagreement about the methodology, just to say that there isn't any fundamental disagreement about the methodology. There are certain points that I make about its application in practice in the detailed assessment. And the main ones of those being, I personally would employ intermediate gradations of sensitivity, magnitude, and effect. I also noted in practice, and I'm prepared to hold my hands up to this if somebody can point out where it doesn't happen, that effectively every time the level of effect is always determined by the magnitude and whether the sensitivity of the receptor is medium or high doesn't appear to have any play in this. So, for instance, if you get a high magnitude effect, it then becomes a substantial effect. Sorry, if you get a high magnitude of change, it then becomes a substantial effect, whether or not the receptor is high or medium sensitivity. And I did look through and try and find out to see if there was more variation on that, but I couldn't see that. So those are the 2 points I'd make there, which I just think means that the approach that I've taken is a bit more graded or refined than the approach that has been taken in the assessment carried out by the applicant. Having said that, I don't have too many disagreements about the end result. As you'll see, I've highlighted that there are about 5 long-term effects that I think would be or could be significant after 15 years, depending on level of plant growth and so on.
Okay, thank you, that's very useful. Ms. Morrison, would you like to come in on the methodology talked about there? I think the point being made by Dr. Wimble is he's unable to see how sensitivity, if the sensitivity of receptors identified as medium or high, how that has been taken on board in terms of the effects and the overall effect in the assessment. Could you explain that a little bit more about how that's been tackled?
Yeah, certainly. Well, as explained in our methodology, which is Appendix 11.1 and ILI 11.26, we consider there are a number of elements that determine how we identify the magnitude of change, and those relate to the size or scale of change, the geographical extent, the duration and reversibility. And it's these different elements that we consider when we're on site undertaking our assessment of landscape effects and visual effects that we consider in relation to the sensitivity of each of the receptors. Now, the sensitivity has been judged by a combination of susceptibility and value for each of the receptors, which determines the sensitivity. This is explained, which is in accordance with GLVIA, which again is ILI 2.27, and it explains that it's important that the assessor explains the judgments, explains their reasoning behind the sensitivity and also the magnitude, and then how those are combined. And in our appendix of assessment for both detailed assessment of visual effects and landscape effects, we explain how what has contributed to our judgment of magnitude and the combination. And it may well be that we have situations where we have a medium magnitude of change as a result of the operations, be it in construction or once operational, different elements of the scheme that contribute to that, which we've outlined in our detailed appendices. And that can combine with a judgment that may well be of a medium sensitivity, or it may be high, and it depends on those judgments as to whether or not we consider that's a moderate or major effect. And I think, as Dr. Wimble explained, that in fact, however you look at his more nuanced or graded approach to assessment, there are very few differences in our assessment findings, and where those are, quite often, not always, I'll agree, will be whether they're the kind of grade of significance, whether they're moderate or major significant effect. GLVIA in paragraphs 3.27 states ideally 3 or 4, but a maximum of 5 categories are preferred as a means of summarizing judgment. So whether we agree or disagree about the levels of judgment and criteria that we apply, we're entirely consistent with GLVIA. There will always be differences in professional opinion and professional approach. Doesn't mean that they're wrong, but there will be those differences, and those can lead to slight differences in our approach to the assessment.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wimble, do you want to comment on that?
No, as I say, really any dispute I have is not about the method as explained. It's simply about how in some cases it's been applied, and I would prefer my own approach, and hopefully I've explained in the detailed assessments where I've taken, for instance, an intermediate grade of sensitivity or magnitude and effect.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to question 2, the statement of agreed matters that's been submitted, an agreement between the council and the applicant, indicates that the council's onshore wind energy supplementary guidance is only relevant so far as identifying the key views, the routes and the gateways. So I'm really just trying to understand if there is a view from participants today as to, if that guidance is actually relevant and in what way it's relevant to the environmental assessment or even to other aspects of the project. So I'll ask the applicant to go first. Ms. Morrison, could you comment on that, please? Yes,
certainly. I mean, we consider this guidance is largely not relevant. It provides a spatial framework for onshore wind energy. It provides a landscape capacity and siting guidance for wind energy development. And it's exactly that, it's for wind energy development and not other forms of development such as pump storage hydro. The landscape capacity in this document is for wind. It's based on sensitivity to wind development, so that particular type of development, and its landscape context. In that sense, it can't be applied to other forms of development that are quite different in their nature and type, such as the development in question. The only area of commonality, as Highland Council have suggested in the statement of agreed matters, relates to the key views, the gateways and routes now, and their existing composition and the features that are visible in those views and gateway features. And the document looks at these specifically in relation to their susceptibility to wind farm development. So where there are similar views, where we do have some similar views from the key views and the key routes and gateways, we have looked at those. They have informed our decision on the representative viewpoints that we've identified, which we consulted on with both the Highland Council and SNH. And we have considered those in our baseline understanding of this study area. And then that is the only area that we consider that the guidance has any implication or relationship with this development.
Just to follow up on that, I think that the council's position and the applicant's position is one on this. Certainly, I've taken from the council's planning and energy policy hearing submission, which is ILI 15.04, paragraph 3.7. The council's position sets out in the last sentence of that 3.7 that the onshore wind energy supplementary guidance has no other relevance to the determination of this the application, other in relation to the points that we've just mentioned, and that ties in obviously with the statement of agreed matters at paragraphs 5.4.6. But of course, it also ties in with the consistent approach that the council have taken on this point, as set out in their reports to committee, which are ILI 6.01 and 6.03, where there's been a sort of consistent position that that guidance is of no other relevance to this application.
Thank you. Dr. Wimble, would you like to comment at all? Just a similar question to you, really. Are there any outstanding matters in relation to the relevance that you've stated, the applicant stated, and how it's been used in terms of looking at the supplementary guidance, or is there something else that you think there is?
Right. Well, I suppose maybe I better hold up my hand and. Perhaps people might think I've gone a little bit off track compared with the statement of agreed matters, but I felt that some of the generic points which are in relation to views from key receptors were still relevant to how any form of development other than wind turbines might be perceived, depending on its location in the two most relevant character areas. Now, whether that is stretching the matter of key receptors too far, I don't know. But you will see in my report, I've explained the guidance in a bit more detail from this is from paragraph 5.22.
Of your hearing statement, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, my hearing statement. And perhaps this is best explained by going to 5.27. And I've quoted what's in the document, but you can refer to the document as well if you wish, which is a very good question. ILI, is that 3.03? And section 5215.
Shall I just get that up actually? So it's ILI 2.13.
It's listed as 3.02, but it's the second 3.02 in the document list supplied by the applicant.
Yes.
And the link is 3.03.
It's 3.02. Just been wrongly labelled.
Yeah. And then if you whirl through to 5215, which is landscape area 14, the flat moorland plateau where the head pond is going to be located.
That's electronic page 62, ma'am.
Of course, yes. Easier way through.
62, thank you. Okay, yes, I've got it.
Well, I mean, basically, I felt that a lot of what is there is relevant to any form of development and not necessarily just wind turbines. So there's a description of landscape role, which is really independent of what form of development is proposed. You then obviously have the key views and key routes, which are again independent of what form of development is involved. And then the landscape sensitivity, now ignoring the scoring for wind farms, it just highlights where the sensitivities lie if you were to have any form of development, whether it is a wind turbine or a tall building or electricity pylon. Views the LCA from outside its boundaries, occurring from elevated plateaus across the Great Glen. So, for instance, think Abriachan. Views from Inverness largely encompass the area that, well, that's not particularly relevant to our point here. And then finally, you have, well, not finally, so you have sensitive visual receptors. Again, I would say they are all independent of what form of development is proposed. Finally, and this might be a bit more controversial from some people's point of view, is potential for wind energy development. And I feel that some of the bullet points that say after turbines should be, the last two bullet points are really something that would be relevant to any form of development in the location described, or potentially relevant. So clear of boundary areas with the broad, steep-sided glen landscape character area, i.e. the crest of the slope above Loch Ness, and that is particularly in locations where development would impinge upon key views. And then it says turbines. Now, if one was just to accept that this is any form of development, should not breach interim horizons when seen from key view locations. Well, again, I would say that the crest of the slope above Loch Ness, whether it's seen from the road on the A82 on the far side of Loch Ness, or whether it's actually seen from some of the viewpoints in the assessment in the other direction, where it's seen, if you like, hanging over the edge of the broad glen, that's a relevant sensitivity. Obviously, I agree completely that wind turbines are a different form of development, but I would argue that those sensitivities would apply to anything that basically sticks up above the horizon.
Mum, if I may just come back on that, I was not suggesting that some of the issues that Dr. Wimble has identified there are not relevant, and we're obviously going to discuss a number of these issues as we go through the general discussion as to in relation to this application today and tomorrow. But I understood that question 2 was clarifying the position in relation to this document, which, as I set out, I had understood the council's position was clear, that they set out in their hearing statement in relation to planning policy that the onshore wind energy supplementary guidance has no other relevance to the determination of this application. And that's been a consistent approach, as I said. That document is, Mum, ILI at 15.04, and it's paragraph 3.7. And that's been a consistent approach that's been set out in the 2 reports to committee, in that document, and also obviously in the statement of agreed matters, where my understanding is that the council's position is set out in paragraphs 5.4.6, that the relevant supplementary guidance consists of THC's onshore wind energy supplementary guidance. It is agreed that only the key views, routes and gateways as identified in the supplementary guidance Loch Ness sensitivity study are relevant. And that approach has been a consistent approach, in my understanding, that the council has taken, and it's consistent with the actual document, ILI 3.03, which makes clear in the introduction that it is in relation to wind energy proposals or developments. So I understood that that's the council's position, and that is the way we have progressed matters on that basis.
So I could respond to that. I do think Mr. Armstrong protests too much. What Dr. Wimble did was take you through the relevant parts of a sample section. We've suggested clearly throughout that key views, routes and gateways are relevant factors, and it's the guidance as to those. But what this part of the document, that, if you like, the second part, the first part of the guidance is generic guidance for wind turbines. The second part provides an analysis of this Loch Ness area. It's an analysis, and then the guidance, then it gives guidance. It gives guidance really in 2 forms. It identifies sensitivities such as the key routes, key views, routes and gateways, which is what Dr. Wimble has taken you through, and it does so on the back of a landscape assessment of smaller areas. And you can't have regard to the key views, routes and gateways without having regard to the underlying assessment. But that underlying assessment does not of itself provide guidance. All the guidance, i.e. the sort of value added part of it, relates to the identification of what are key views, routes and gateways. And all the factors that Dr. Wimble has pointed to are primarily concerned, particularly the last factor, are concerned with where development might impact on key views. And if you go back to electronic page 63 of 76, which is the last box on LN14, both the bullet points he referred to tie into key views. Now, he was suitably clear that that is under the title of wind energy development, but they are still key views and there's still sensitivities related to them. So I don't accept that Dr. Wimble's gone further than the statement of common ground. we're not seeking to rely on this, and we're not going back on the suggestion that you can apply the guidance for wind energy development for turbines to this type of development pump storage. But on the other hand, it would be ludicrous to ignore a detailed assessment that was carried out without any particular appeal in mind. And I don't understand either learn from Mr. Armstrong or his witness to suggest that one should ignore it, or the identification of that follows from that assessment of the key views, routes and gateways. And again, there doesn't seem to be disagreement about what those key views, routes and gateways are. So to my mind, in our submission, we haven't resiled from our statement of common ground, or indeed the statement in paragraph 3.7 of our policy paper, whose identification I have lost for the moment, the number, but there's nothing in what Dr. Wimble said to you this morning or in his statement which goes beyond that.
Ma'am, I'm obliged that my learned friend has clarified that they're not moving from the statement of common ground or the planning hearing statement. And I did say at the start of my points that I'm not disputing that the key views are relevant, and indeed we're going to discuss them in some detail, I'm sure. But my understanding this question was primarily about was in relation to the actual relevance of this document. And I'm obliged to my learned friend for confirming that the position is as set out in the statement of agreed matters and in the planning hearing statement. If just on specifically the points that Dr. Wimble has mentioned, if Ruth Morrison can come back on one or 2 points now.
Yes. Ms. Morrison, do you want to come back?
Thank you. I'd just like to reaffirm that this document has been specifically provided by Highland Council in relation to wind developments that everyone is aware of now. Whilst it identifies characteristics of the landscape, those are also identified in the SNH LCT landscape character type descriptions. We've referred to them within our assessment in multiple locations. They've informed our assessment, as have the identification of these key views that we've talked about and routes. All of that I have no disagreement over. What I think you have to be very careful and have to be very aware of is that it's a sensitivity of the landscape and these visual receptors in relation to a specific type of development, and that is wind. It is wind farms, very, very different in terms of scale and height to the development in question, and don't consider that there is a relevance in terms of their sensitivities and how the characteristics and the potential for wind energy development that's identified and the associations with varying features in the landscape character areas and how those could be impacted or impinged by a wind farm development is not the same as pump storage hydro. Now we will, as we go through these questions, discuss the characteristics of the landscape character types and of the key views, or indeed all of the views we've considered, and how those will be impacted by the development in question. And I think that that's a key thing to remember, that it's a sensitivity in relation to a specific type of development.
Mr. Finley, anything further from your side before we move on?
Well, it transpires that there doesn't appear to be any significant difference between us, and insofar as there is, we'll leave it to you to look at the document as to whether it's, I think, perhaps a difference of emphasis more than anything else from Ruth Morrison, who is suggesting that the sensitivities are wholly related or primarily related to wind energy development, and Dr. Wimble, who suggests they're perhaps more broader form of assessment and then applied to wind energy development. It's a difference of emphasis which will no doubt come out during the course of the other questions that we have, but I think it bears out the submissions that I made and Dr. Wimble made, that there's no change from our statement of agreed matters document, and both parties are quite familiar with the, if you like, the limited battleground as to the relevance of it. But I think perhaps the underlying point is that both parties agree it is relevant and a helpful document. Ms. Morrison says it builds on the SNH guidance, which it does indeed, and that I think, although I can't remember it precisely, I'm sure that's expressly acknowledged within it. So hopefully that's sufficient for your purposes.
Okay, yes, I think it will allow me an opportunity to have a look a little bit more in detail. I think I've got enough to go on with that particular line of questioning there, so I'll move us on to the next question. And we've touched on this a little bit in terms of, obviously, we're talking about the type of development and the guidance that for the assessment. But in acknowledging that tall structures like wind farms require a particular approach, I suppose, in terms of cumulative assessment, there's lots of guidance in terms of what to look at. What are parties' views on what's appropriate for a pumped storage hydro scheme? The approach that's been taken in the assessment has obviously been informed by a range of guidance. Is there some dispute about the overall, and I just want to confine this to a discussion about the method of when looking at cumulative impact rather than any detail at this stage. So first of all, I'm just going to ask the applicant first of all, Ms. Morrison, if you could just explain what guidance has been used in looking at the cumulative assessment, and then I will ask the council to comment.
Thank you. We've used guidance contained in the guidelines for landscape and visual impact assessment. That's the key document that as a landscape architect you use in assessing impacts and assessing cumulative impacts. Chapter 7 within the document of GRVIA goes into some detail about cumulative landscape and visual effects and the appropriate approach to assessment of those. Paragraphs 7.4 and 7.5 identify the importance of agreeing a consistent approach with determining authorities at the outset, to do that through scoping. Indeed, we did at scoping stage and subsequently agreed the approach to our assessment and also the cumulative developments that were considered to be appropriate to include within the assessment. The GRVIA further goes on in 7.5 to explain that it needs to be a reasonable and proportionate approach, and that the emphasis very much has to be on the likely significant effects rather than trying to catalogue every possible cumulative effect that there could be. And this guidance has underpinned our approach throughout the LVIA from the outset, where we had early discussions with SNH and the Highland Council regarding the scope and the approach to the cumulative assessment. There's also reference in a document by SNH, which is ILI 2.28, which is hydroelectric schemes and the natural heritage. It doesn't provide guidance on how you would go about assessing cumulative effects of hydro schemes, and indeed that guidance is more specifically to do with smaller scale hydro and run-of-river schemes rather than pumped storage hydro. Nonetheless, it identifies it's important to consider if there are potential cumulative effects, particularly from other hydroelectric proposals. There are no hydroelectric proposals within the study area. We looked beyond that and looked within a wider study area, of which Corrie Glass was one that was at the time was being determined. We scoped that out of our cumulative assessment based on the lack of intervisibility and distance between the developments.
Okay, thank you for that. Dr. Wimble, what's your view on the relevant guidance to use in a cumulative assessment of this particular type of development?
Well, first of all, I would dispute that the principles involved in cumulative assessment are different for wind farms as opposed to any other form of development. So the issues that you're looking at, which have been developed mainly in relation to wind farms, because that is perhaps because of their visibility and number in Scotland. S&H in particular has developed guidance on cumulative assessment further than has been developed anywhere else. However, I would argue that the basic principles involved in that type of assessment are the same for all forms of development, and in support of that, I would go to paragraph 7.4 of GLVIA.
Paragraph, sorry, 7.4.
4.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And the first sentence, which states, "This is an evolving area of practice that is relevant to all forms of development and land use change, not only to wind farms." So the second point I would make then is that this S&H guidance and the principles outlined in GLVIA are the relevant guidance and in many ways the only guidance that's set out in any detail that we can look to. So I would sympathise with what Ms. Morrison has said, in that they did discuss this matter with the council at the outset of the development and agreed on a set of developments that would be included. I obviously have come into this later in the game as a fresh pair of eyes, and really the first point I'd make is that I didn't think many of the developments that were highlighted, which are mainly applications or consents and not any existing development, were particularly relevant to or related to the scheme in any way, either by their nature or because of their distance of separation. Then, having read the assessment, I noticed in descriptions of the landscape and the viewpoints, where relevant, that both the electricity line that's adjacent to the site and in particular Far Wind Farm that's seen from some of the viewpoints were highlighted in the descriptions of the views. And my approach to cumulative assessment would be to include baseline developments in a cumulative assessment, as well as in the assessment of, if you like, the solus impacts, the impacts of the development on its own. So those have been cited, for instance, in descriptions of the viewpoint as detracting elements in the view. But they're also, if you look at it from a point of view of cumulative change in the landscape, they are features which are seen with the development that in fact relate to the function of the development. They don't particularly look like the development, well, certainly not in its later stages, but pump storage hydro, wind farms, other hydro schemes, and electricity transmission lines are all intimately related with the function of pump storage hydro and likely to be developed together across the landscape of the Highlands and other parts of Scotland. So I would recommend my approach as really looking at the more relevant cumulative developments. So I then looked at quite a large area because some of the developments that I was that I've included as being potentially cumulative with the Red John scheme are obviously visible over large distances. So I felt justified in including all the relevant developments in THC1 in a 30-kilometre radius. Do you perhaps have that?
It's your table 1 of your hearing statement.
THC1 is the document, is best seen on plan. It just simply shows a 30-kilometre study area.
Yes.
It shows the 5-kilometre study area of the site as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it shows all the development types within that area. Now, I'm not for a moment suggesting that all of those developments are going to lead to any form of significant cumulative development with the site, but I'm really just showing those for completeness and transparency. It's not an exercise that took a huge amount of time. However, I do feel that the closer wind farms and the electricity transmission lines that are seen either with the site from a viewpoint simultaneously, or are seen in succession from one or two of the higher viewpoints, so that if you, for instance, stand on viewpoint 6 and turn around, you've got some wind farms behind you that are quite close, and turn around again and look at the development site, you see the electricity transmission line, and you would see the pump storage hydro site itself. So that's why I feel justified in including those developments in a cumulative assessment. You'll see that I've restricted the cumulative assessment to a handful of viewpoints where these other developments are form part of the view, or form part of at least of the full panorama of a 360-degree view. And simply my assessment has pointed out where I think the Red John hydro scheme would add to the cumulative change in the landscape as seen from these viewpoints. And perhaps the last point I'd like to make is obviously the extent to which it adds to cumulative effects is going to depend on the stage of the development. So that, I mean, we're all agreed that the most significant impacts are concentrated around the construction and early operational period. And this is the point at which the development is most likely to look like a new object in the landscape that can be seen with these other developments.
Mom, if I could just come back, that I thought question 3 was aimed, as you set out, at looking at the approach rather than going into the detail. And we're obviously going to go into the detail in relation to the other questions. And I'd assume that the structure is set out, that we go into the detail later on, but just now we're looking at the approach. But Dr. Wimble mentioned the first sentence in paragraph 7.4 of the GLVIA guidance, but I wonder, it might be just helpful for Dr. Wimble to clarify that obviously that sentence has got to be seen in the context of the paragraph 7.3 and the rest of paragraph 7.4. Obviously 7.3 identifies that cumulative visual effects are particularly relevant to wind farms, and that second sentence sets out that this results both from the number of such schemes requiring assessment and the potentially high level of visibility of these tall structures, which means that cumulative visual effects in particular may be more likely. So it's got to be seen in that context, and also, of course, importantly for the purposes of our discussion today, in the context of what's set out in paragraph 7.4. And at the end of paragraph 7.4, and in particular that last sentence, the second last sentence and last sentence, where it sets out that it's very important to agree the approach on a case-by-case basis, depending on the specific project, and that the scope of cumulative landscape and visual effects in particular must be agreed at the outset. And in this case, of course, matters were agreed, and I appreciate that Dr. Wimble has referred to the council agreeing this matter, but it was also in consultation with SNH, who also agreed this matter. So would Dr. Wimble agree that his reference to that first sentence in paragraph 7.4 has got to be seen in that context, and in particular, the context of this scheme and the agreement and the discussion that was had between the council, SNH, and the applicant. I appreciate that Dr. Wimble was not involved in that, and he has been brought in at a late stage to raise, well, he is raising this matter because, again, this is not a matter that was set out by the councillors either in their reason for objection or set out in the discussion that the councillors had that are minuted in the minutes of the council meetings. If I could just then now go over to Ms. Mauritson to come back on one or two points, specific points.
Okay, Ms. Mauritson, come in.
Thank you. GLVIA in 7.13, it's paragraph 713, states that those existing schemes and those which are under construction should be included in the baseline for both landscape and visual effects assessment, and then in brackets, the LVIA baseline. So as Dr. Wimble quite rightly pointed out, we identify in our baseline the varying features within the landscape, of which the overhead line, of which distant views of some wind farms are visible from certain locations. Those are identified in our baseline landscape and visual sections and have informed the subsequent assessment as we clearly assess against the baseline and the features and characteristics that are within that. And I would suggest that there's a potential for double counting to including your cumulative assessment, schemes that are already present in the baseline and that can inform and characterize it and that have informed our judgments of sensitivity of these character areas or views in relation to the development in question. And in the over 20 years I've been undertaking landscape and visual impact assessments for many energy generated schemes, large scale energy developments, non-wind development. We have always followed the guidance identified in GRVIA and not included baseline schemes in those projects, and it has never once been challenged as an inappropriate way of conducting the cumulative assessment.
Dr. Wimble, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, I would point to well, first of all, I'd like to make the general point that the assessment of the effects of scheme on its own and the assessment of cumulative effects of a scheme, and this applies to any scheme, are in a way two separate issues. Because when you're assessing cumulative effects, you're looking at issues like change in the landscape or change in a view that's happening as a result of perhaps many different developments or certainly related developments. And this in itself is an issue of concern. If you always take, if you like, eliminate the existing developments from a cumulative assessment, then you'll end up with a situation that where there is a baseline with many developments, adding your particular development to that baseline will always end up with a low and not significant cumulative change. And then the next development will be an even smaller increment. So there are wider issues here. And perhaps I could point to paragraph 716 in GLVIA.
716?
Yes, that's right. And it starts at the top. There is no doubt that stakeholders, including local communities, will not draw artificial distinctions between what already exists or is under construction and is therefore part of the LVI baseline, and what may happen as a result of schemes that may be implemented in the future. They will be concerned about the totality of cumulative effect of past, present, and future proposals. So in answer to Ms. Morrison, I would say when you're undertaking an assessment of cumulative change and you look at what is commonly called scenario 1, which is adding the proposed development to the baseline of existing related developments, that is a different assessment that you're making from the one where you are just counting those as part of a baseline scene or landscape. You are looking in the cumulative assessment, particularly at the cumulative aspect of it, of how is this type of development or these related developments changing the landscape in totality. So you'll see S&H's guidance refers typically to three, and we can go to this if you wish, but it refers typically to scenarios where you assess the development against a baseline of existing plus consented, and a baseline of existing plus consented plus proposed. And these are three different assessments that you make because all of them are theoretical scenarios, but scenario 1, where you're assessing against existing, is obviously the most likely scenario that will occur. So that is why I justify undertaking a separate cumulative assessment, which is not necessarily exactly the same thing as a solus assessment.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Wilbur. I'm just going to come back to the applicant. Ms. Morrison, do you want to comment on that in terms of that general approach that was set out, and just explain to me, what exactly the approach has been in this assessment?
Yes, certainly. I'd just like to go back to Dr. Wimborne in the sense he's referred to a commonly called scenario 1. It's only commonly called within the S&H guidance, which is specifically developed for wind energy development, not other forms of development. And I entirely agree with the scenarios he's outlaid, and that's exactly what we would follow, and I have followed in the past for wind energy projects. However, this isn't a wind energy project, it's a pump storage hydro scheme. We have considered baseline developments as part of the existing landscape and in views, and in relation to how the Red John development will affect those characteristics of that existing landscape. We haven't followed a scenario 1 approach as identified in the S&H guidance for cumulative effects of wind farms, because we didn't believe that to be an appropriate guidance or an approach, and nor did S&H or the Highland Council consider that that was an appropriate approach that we should have followed. So our cumulative assessment considers the baseline as described in the landscape and visual assessment, and considers cumulative developments as identified in the EIAR, and considered how those developments may affect the landscape character or the views.
Is it possible I could respond to Mr. Armstrong's point just briefly? I quite understand that he is at pains and will be no doubt throughout today to point out the approach officers took. But the reason that Dr. Wimble is here is because members took a different view from officers. And Dr. Wimble is entirely entitled to reach a different view from officers or indeed S&H. And he made it clear in his answer that he accepts that Ms. Morrison followed the guidance and took an agreed approach and consulted with THC and S&H, or Nature Scott as they now have recently become. So we're not making a point a sort of forensic point that as to what approach was adopted at what stage. Dr. Wimble's entirely entitled to take his view that he did when he's asked to look at this first time round. And I make that point now. I'll try not and repeat it later on if the same issue comes up. The second point I'd make is that the two issues that have arisen are primarily is it justified taking a different approach to cumulative assessment between that commonly adopted for wind farms and that for other development. And Dr. Wimble's view is that the approach should be the same. Obviously the application and the will be different, but you should look at your stage 1, 2 and 3 approach is a good structured way of looking at it. And the final point I'd say is that Ms. Morrison said that she emphasised at the outset of her question that one should take a reasoned and proportionate approach to looking at cumulative assessments. And I would simply pose this question: is taking into account the electricity line and Far wind farm unreasonable and disproportionate? And when you're looking at it from viewpoint 7 or 2, for instance, in our submission, it would clearly be both reasonable and proportionate to consider the cumulative impact, particularly as Dr. Wimble emphasised in the early years, of those developments, because they are what will impinge on the viewer as a matter of practice. So that'll obviously be a matter for you to assess or reassess, having heard the discussion today and having been at such viewpoints as you've been to already.
Would the applicant like to come back on that? Mr. Armstrong, do you have any further points?
Yes, if Ms. Moritz could come back first, and then I've got just one point after that.
Just briefly, because I do think this discussion is going to be played out again when we look at these specific locations. So these specific viewpoints, I think we're going to have a very similar discussion over the approach taken and the scenario 1 that Dr. Wimble's assessed and presented in his hearing statement. But just to be clear again, I consider that the overhead line that is being referred to and the distant Far, the wind farm called Far, which indeed is in the distance and far away, that appears visible from some viewpoints, viewpoint 2 in particular, have been detailed in our assessment. They have been considered, they have informed our analysis of the existing baseline conditions and have been incorporated into our assessment as a whole.
Mr. Armstrong?
And just to come back on the point that my honoured friend Mr. Finlay made, the point I was making is that Dr. Wimble's approach was at odds with what the council's position had been throughout this process. It's at odds with the SNH position, and it also is an approach which was not identified by the councillors in their discussions or in their objection. And I was making that point. Dr. Wimble is perfectly entitled to put across his argument. He set that out in the hearing statement, but it's to be seen in that context, and also the context, as I set out, of paragraphs 7.3 and 7.4 of the guidance.
Okay, thank you. As you say, I think we will get into a little bit more detail on this. I'm going to move us on, just in talking about the kind of principles of that at this stage. And what we're going to move on to now is talking again about a little bit about the assessment that's been undertaken. The 5 kilometre study area of the project, I think the assessment says that this was not extended because of, the assessment indicates that significant adverse effects on the visual amenity were considered to be limited within that range. So I just want to understand, are parties disagreeing on the 5 kilometre study area? I sense that there might be some disagreement on parts of it, or am I picking that up wrongly? I'd like to just go to the applicant first, just to clarify and just explain the reason for the 5-kilometre study area, how that arose in the first place, and then I'll go to the council to answer that.
Okay, thank you. Following GRVIA, our approach to determining study areas for this development, and indeed any development, was a combination of desk-based and site-based analysis. We produced a zone of theoretical visibility, which is ZTV for short, which can be identified on ILI 9.82, that's figure 11.6. And that's what we term as a bare earth ZTV. So it basically is purely based on the topography of the ground. It doesn't take into effect any potential screening benefit from structures or from woodland at all. So it gives, if you like, a worst case kind of extent of theoretical visibility of the development within the wider landscape and people's views. We use this as a tool in determining the extent of the study area, but also how we might consider siting of viewpoints within it, as well as the extent of landscape character that we would be looking at. And I think it's important to consider that the study area is to determine the likely significant effects. And if you refer to figure 11.6 in the ZTV, you can see that actually to the east and west that the theoretical visibility is determined or extent to higher points. The areas where it tends to extend out of where we've defined a 5-kilometre buffer from the development is particularly along the loch, and looking towards the southwesterly direction towards viewpoint 9, which is at Urquhart Castle. The analysis from that point suggested that the further that you head in a kind of southerly direction along the loch, the effects substantially reduce, and indeed the effects, residual effects from viewpoint 9 as such that they are considered, I think, by all parties to be not significant and to be minor adverse. So really just to explain why we didn't go beyond that, why we didn't look at any viewpoints or any landscape character units out with this area, is because we'd consider that the likely significant effects are contained within this broad 5-kilometre buffer. It's not a set boundary as such, but it helps ensure that the assessment's proportionate and that we don't go and consider every possible impact that could be experienced on either landscape character types or on visual amenity.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Wimble.
Well, I have no particular dispute with what Ms. Morrison has said. Perhaps the perception of disagreement has arisen because of THC1, I'll call it the cumulative study area. Mm-hmm. But hopefully I explained that that's in many ways a different matter from the assessment of the development itself, and by necessity I extended it to 30 kilometres just to be comprehensive and transparent as to what the cumulative background was. But that extent of study area is only really relevant to cumulative effects.
Are you suggesting, though, Dr. Wimble, that features that extend into that 30-kilometre area, particular infrastructure, should have been covered in the cumulative assessment, and therefore the study area should have been wider?
Well, maybe I can explain this in a different way. If we look at the at THC1, and you'll see the red line, which is the 5-kilometre study area, I would only be considering the additional cumulative effects of the proposed development on receptors that lie within that study area. So once you're outside that study area, the additional effect of the development would be pretty minor. So I've only considered cumulative effects from viewpoints within the 5-kilometre study area, but by necessity you have to throw a bigger loop round the wider area to net the wind farms and electricity lines, which are much more visible than the proposed development.
Okay, yeah, I understand. Ms. Morrison, do you want to come back on that at all at this stage? Or should we look at that in detail maybe later on?
Yeah, no, I'm happy with that approach. Thank you.
I'm conscious we could perhaps just grab a quick break just now, and then we can move on to the landscape character section. If that suits everybody, just a quick comfort break. Now it's just coming up to 12 minutes to 11. Can we be back at 11 o'clock, please? So if you could just keep everything, just mute yourselves, but just keep your screens on. That means it won't time out and you won't leave the meeting. And if we could just be back here at 11 o'clock, please, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay, welcome back everybody. The recording's just gone back on. Hopefully you've had time for a quick break. I was hoping to finish for lunch at about 12:30, so we'll just see where we are on the agenda at that point and find a suitable point to stop for lunch. Now, I said just before the break there that we were going to move on to impacts on landscape character. So I've got 3 questions under this heading. Just picking up question 5 first of all, and I'm really just been going through the council's, Dr. Wimble's hearing statement in picking up some of these questions, just so I can understand a little bit better about the position that the council has. So I think it's fair to say in question 5, while in broad agreement with the assessment of effects on landscape character, Dr. Wimble, you indicate that you've reviewed how the PROS scheme would relate to key sensitivities of the area. And I suppose I'm just wanting to, and this is paragraph 6.49 particularly, I think I've honed in on. You note certain matters that you've looked at, which have also been reviewed, how the PROS scheme will relate to key sensitivities of the area. I suppose I'm just understanding, I want to understand what you've done there and what you mean by that, and just if you could explain to me what's happened there, and also just how that review might assist Scottish ministers' understanding of landscape effects, you know, how that might help the minister to understand what the landscape effects of the project are. So Dr. Wimble, that question to you first, please.
Well, I'd refer you to my table 2, which is a little bit before the paragraph.
Yes.
And quite simply, these were what I thought were the relevant sensitivities to change. And really, I just analysed them in terms of how the proposed development might relate to these sensitivities. And that's as far as it goes. But to summarise, I would say that it points out the sensitivity of the side slopes, ridgelines and skyline containing Loch Ness, the sensitivity of views up and down and across the loch, the sensitivity to modification of a landform on the plateau above the loch, and the effects on tranquility of temporary roads and activities on side slopes and by Loch Ness in the tail pond area.
So you're suggesting that these factors, the sensitivity to change, this assessment that you've done hasn't been done to this level by the applicant in their environmental? Well,
it has. I mean, these sensitivities are kind of taken into account when you look at the key characteristics or the special qualities. I'm never quite sure what they call them in relation to the LCA, the SLA. However, I just felt that had not been specifically done and was a worthwhile exercise just to point out where the sensitivities lay.
Okay, Ms. Morrison, do you want to come in and just comment on the approach taken by Dr. Wimble there?
Yes, certainly. I think it's important to note in Dr. Wimble's hearing statement in paragraph 6.47, where he states that this analysis does not greatly change my view of the applicant's assessment. And indeed, in his concluding paragraphs in 6.49, he states he broadly agrees with the assessment effects on special qualities of the SLA. I think it would be helpful perhaps to explain in terms of the citation how landscape and visual characteristics, the special qualities and features, and the sensitivities to change are considered. So these are three elements that in the citation, which I could take you to, which is ILI document 2.25, and it's on page Roman numeral 4.
Okay, just one moment.
It explains, yes, certainly.
It's got a big document, just taking a minute to open.
Yeah, sure.
I did have a look at this previously, so yes, it's the Roman numerals at the early part of the document.
It is, yeah.
Is there a page reference to the document?
It is, it's Roman numeral 4.
Thank you.
Bear with me, it's being awkward, it's just... Okay, I think I'm there. Yes, I am. Just going to.
Okay.
Is there a plan of? Let me just see. Is this the special landscape area? Have I got the right bit here? Actually, no, I haven't. It's just jumped again. I don't know if it's my document keeps every time I try and scroll down it keeps jumping.
Okay. I just wanted to explain really in the document, and it's early in the SLA, so that it can help people. I think it's really to help people understand how the citations for each special landscape area across Highland area have been determined. And I just want to take you through the different elements so that you can see how we've used that in our assessment.
Okay.
So the key landscape and visual characteristics we've identified in our chapter and paragraph 11.4.15. That's page 11-11. We've also identified the special qualities and features on the subsequent page, 11.12. And these are the key elements and the within the SLA they've identified that are important and that contribute to the landscape and visual characteristics, the special qualities, and indeed why it's determined that it is being designated as a special landscape area. The sensitivities to change, it states on the SLA citation on page 4, are very closely related to the specific characteristics and qualities, to those special qualities. So we've used the sensitivities. So these sensitivities to change are important to understand in terms of when you're considering the development. And we looked at it during the iterative process of design and assessment. So it's been important to consider what these sensitivities are to try and ensure that we can try and, wherever possible, either design out or minimize effects on them. So without understanding what the sensitivities are, you can't, I would argue, you can't adequately design and indeed assess the effects of the development on this. So whilst our assessment specifically looks at the special qualities and features and the characteristics, That's why we haven't then assessed against the sensitivities to change, because they're so closely related to the key characteristics that, that we haven't done both. And I think you'll find in our Appendix 11.2, which is the detailed assessment of landscape effects on the designations and character areas, which is ILI 11.27. We've taken the special qualities and features and looked at how the development has the potential to affect those, which has led to the judgments in our assessment.
Okay. Dr. Wimble, do you want to provide any further comment on what the applicants just said on that matter?
Well, only really that I carried out Table 2 as an exercise to, well, both clarify it in my own head and hopefully to inform you. And just, I think I raised one point in terms of the applicant's assessment of special qualities, which was to do, if you have their assessment table on your screen, there's the second point: steep-sided slopes of the glen, often deeply incised by watercourses, also flanked by a diverse mix of woodland and forests, form a smooth moorland skyline ridge. And I felt that those characteristics would be affected by the development because woodland is being cleared on the top of the slope, and on the sides of the slope there would be activities on the sides of the slope, and the head pond appears on the skyline.
Okay. So, barring that one particular point, you stand by your point, your note in your hearing statement that you doesn't greatly change your view of the applicant's assessment, except that one particular point. Is that what you're saying now?
Yeah, the point that I've highlighted.
Yeah, in page, it could be page 11.2-2 of the assessment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Ms. Morrison, do you want to come back on that? Just about that particular point that Dr. Wimble has highlighted.
Yes, I can. I think we've taken each of the sites' special qualities and considered them in relation to the development. I'd agree that there is a change to the forestry within this part of the SLA. But as we'll go on to in further comments and discussions later with the subsequent questions, the change from commercial forestry to an extensive area of native woodland planting is indeed actually a positive change, which is in fact identified in the SLA citation under the suggested enhancements within the SLA. So it's entirely consistent with some of the recommendations there. But really, yes, just to reaffirm, even if there is dispute over that small point, there seems to be no dispute in terms of, well, indeed, there's agreement on the assessment that we've undertaken on the SLA.
Mr. Wimble, you've not muted. Is there anything further you want to add before I move on to the next point?
Well, only that the assessment of the other special qualities looked at the effects early on in construction in year one as well as in the long term. And obviously the effects would apply mainly in the construction and earlier period.
Could I just come back on that, please? I'd like to point out that the assessment does consider effects during construction and also in operation and later in year 15.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to question 6, there's a reference in your statement, Dr. Wimble, about taller elements being difficult to conceal or integrate in the broad, steep-sided glen landscape character type. I just want to clarify with you, is specific reference there being made to any particular features of the proposed development or even its construction?
Well, first of all, can I say I did a word search on taller elements, and it only came up in relation to the flat moorland plateau with woodland.
Ah, did it? Did I wrongly? Okay.
Yeah.
Apologies, that's my fault.
So I'm really describing the sensitivity of what is a broad undulating landform with quite a lot of open views, such that any tall object would be seen from a distance, assuming that you're not actually standing in forestry. So, I mean, for instance, if you were to go to viewpoints 4 or 11, or my viewpoint of from Loch Ashy to the northeast, you can see there are long views in which anything that stands up slightly in the landscape is very visible. So to the extent that that landform is in one of the higher locations in the area, by the landform I mean the head pond, it would be visible and potentially prominent over quite a wide area.
Ms. Morrison, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, I think this is perhaps leading into question 7, given that we're now looking at the flat moorland plateau opposed to the broad steep-sided glen LCT. But just in relation to what Dr. Wimble's just discussed, as he quite rightly stated, there's a lot of forestry in this LCT. In fact, it's one of the characteristics of this moorland plateau area, which is dominated by large areas of forestry plantation. So in fact, there are limited areas, despite if you look at the ZTV, might suggest that there's widespread visibility across this LCT. That's actually not the case when you're on site. There are limited locations where you can experience more open views within it, mainly because of the way you can move through the LCT, the limited routes in it, but also the large stands of forestry, which will prevents widespread visibility, as you might interpret from looking at the ZTV on its own. The intake-outtake structure at the head pond, as explained in the FEI, which is ILI 13.19 to 24, and certainly the revised visualizations, shows how the reduction in the height of the intake-outtake structure to only 4 meters has reduced substantially the visibility of that particular what might be considered more taller element within the landscape. The landscape earthworks that are proposed in addition to the head pond embankment, particularly to the northerly part, which will be apparent from within this LCT, assist in integrating the head pond structure combined with the native woodland planting that's proposed. The modifications that were shown in the, sorry, this is probably reaching into question 7, but the modifications
It's okay, we're moving into question 7, I think, anyway, and I'll pick up any of these points, that's fine.
Okay. The landform modifications that were explained in the FEI, while other than the intake-outtake structure, generally relate to modifications seen on the west-facing side of the head pond embankment, so are more important when considering the landscapes when seen from the other side of the loch rather than from within this LCT. But just in summary, and specifically in relation to this LCT, there are the head pond on, in fact, perhaps I can take you to viewpoint 4, the wireline overlay, which is ILI 10.30.
Just give me 1 second.
Yeah.
Did you say viewpoint?
Viewpoint 4.
Viewpoint 4, yeah, okay.
And it's particularly the wireline overlay.
Okay. Okay, viewpoint 4, Trail of the Seven Locks route, yeah, okay, with you on the minor road.
And if you move to the layout that shows the existing view and then the wireline overlay underneath.
Just get those two up, existing view. Okay, yes.
To the southern end of the head pond embankment, you'll see from the wireline overlay by the different colours against the existing landform that we're almost at the existing ground level at that end of the head pond. And then the ground level starts to drop away towards the northeasterly end. But for a section of this, especially when viewed from this LCT, part of that head pond embankment is pretty much at a similar level to the ground level, and then there is more than embankment seen, as you can see on the wire line as you head to the head further north, and that's where the landscape embankment comes into play to provide a greater degree of integration and use of landform to do that. So really, from this LCT in particular, certainly from the kind of southern end of it, and indeed perhaps the eastern sides too, and certainly from viewpoint 4, there are sections of it where the head pond doesn't appear prominent in the view, particularly because of the association with the existing ground levels. And furthermore, there's existing forestry that's being retained. You can see in that view between the head pond structure and the forestry that sits behind the overhead line. That's being retained, it's out with the red line boundary and will remain unaffected by the development. There's further forestry or native woodland planting, sorry, I should say, that will be planted between that line of existing forestry and the head pond embankment.
Okay. Dr. Wimble, we've kind of moved on to question 7. Apologies, I got the LCT area wrong. So we're talking about the same flat moorland, plateau, woodland LCT. How far does your views on this set out in your hearing statement take account of the revisions that have been made to the embankment slope as set out in the FEI and the SEI?
Well, from as much as I've been able to see from the FEI illustrations, I agree that the modifications made are an improvement compared with what's shown in the environmental statement. I still feel that from some viewpoints, the embankment will look fairly regular and unnatural landform projecting above the trees. So for instance, in viewpoint 4, towards the northern end, towards where the viewpoint is actually located, and also seen from viewpoints 2 and 7.
And 7 being
2 being Abriacan and 7.
That's on the other side of Loch Ness and
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And near the Great Glen Way, yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose viewpoint 10 as well. Well, basically the viewpoints where I have considered that there would be a residual significant effect after 15 years. It is because of the nature of that embankment not looking quite natural. But I obviously I agree that it's an improvement from before, where the head pond structure was a small but prominent eye-catching feature.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Morrison, do you want to come back on the further points made there by Dr. Wimble?
Just briefly, I think your question really is in relation to the landscape. These are landscape character questions and not visual impact questions. So just to clarify really that the effects on this LCT that I don't think Dr. Wimble or myself are in disagreement over the findings. Indeed, he agrees that during construction there would be moderate adverse effects, remaining so in operation year 1, but by operation year 15 they would be minor adverse. So I don't think there's any disagreement in the findings of the assessment of effects on this LCT.
Dr. Wimble, is that correct?
So well, yeah, I've strayed into visual effects as opposed to landscape effects.
Okay.
But my view would be the extent of the visual effects is such that it wouldn't translate as being a significant landscape effect.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think we can comfortably move on to the visual impacts now, and I appreciate we've been kind of straying a little bit into those, and there's probably quite a lot in this section as well anyway, so we'll see how far we get through with some of this and reach a point where we can have a break perhaps before we get into looking at the individual viewpoints. Perhaps we'll leave that for this afternoon. So I had a couple of questions initially that as when I was on site actually and looking around and just wanting to understand a little bit more from the applicant's point of view as to why certain viewpoints had been chosen and the background for them. So with regard to viewpoint 11, which is really in relation to the scheduled monument that's there, I just wanted to understand why the particular viewpoint was chosen where it was, rather than actually closer to the scheduled monument itself, which is a kind of elevated feature in the landscape.
Mum, it might be easier if we took questions 8 and 9 together, because they're both in relation to the same point, and I think we'd just be repeating ourselves.
That's absolutely fine. They are related, so although I'd separate them out because I want to make sure I get answers to both of them, but if you can roll those two together, that's absolutely fine.
Thank you. Viewpoint 11 is representative views of users of the local sea road, of users, walkers, cyclists, and vehicle users. We didn't choose a viewpoint from the scheduled monument to inform the visual impact assessment, because we considered it wasn't really representative of receptors in that area. Indeed, it's really quite hard to actually get to the scheduled monument. You have to climb over a fence and across the moorland, and as you may well have done yourself. So that's really why that we felt that the view taken for viewpoint 11 was more representative of the way people experience that part of their study area and would likely experience a change in their view. But just to be clear as to why there were these 3 visualizations prepared, as part of the consultation with Historic Environment Scotland, the cultural heritage specialists discussed their assessment of impacts on the setting of the scheduled monument, and has requested that they provide them with a series of visualizations so that they could try and understand the potential effect that the development might have on the setting of the asset. And to enable them to do that, they wanted a viewpoint, a visualization prepared from the actual top of the fort, which is one of them, one from within the scheduled monument itself, but not at the top, and then another one so that they could see the development in combination with the assets, so that they could try and understand what those setting issues could be. So those three have been prepared to specifically assist the cultural heritage assessment.
Okay, so that request came from Historic Environment Scotland in consultation, but I maybe haven't picked that up in any of their responses.
Yes, it did.
You've lost sound here.
Thank you for clarifying that. Mr. Armstrong, were you going to come in there?
Do you want to say that I've lost my sound? All right, no, you can.
I can hear you fine, actually, yes. Okay. Okay, moving on to question 10. The assessment visualisations at year 15 show substantial tree growth, and the applicant has provided details of the planting heights for each species based on the woodland restructuring plan, which is figure 12.6, and the outline length as well, which is ILI 11.02. Given this, and this is a question I'm going to put to Dr. Wimble, representing the council, are there outstanding concerns as to the accuracy of the visualisations provided? So, Dr. Wimble, would you just like to answer that question, please?
Well, I don't have concerns as to the technical accuracy of the visualizations. My concerns, which I've explained in detail, were firstly, at first stage, in relation to not knowing what tree heights were shown in the visualizations, which has obviously now been answered in the rebuttal response. And secondly, to what I felt was a fairly optimistic degree of growth of the trees. And well, for instance, looking at, perhaps it'd be best to have the table in the rebuttal.
Yes, of course.
Hand, if I can. So many documents open now. There we are. Yeah, so it talks about Scots pine after 15 years being 8 meters high, birch 8.5, aspen 12, rowan 6. I suppose I'm concentrating on Scots pine here because I believe 8 meters would be a very optimistic height after 15 years for a Scots pine tree planted in a plantation in a moorland area. And so you may well ask, well, what's the evidence for that? Because obviously Miss Morrison has been advised by forestry experts. That's why we, at a rather late stage, produced the evidence from the forestry handbook, which shows real measurements of growth of Scots pine and Sitka spruce. Again, perhaps you would like to.
Yes, that'd be useful.
I'm
just looking at the extracts, if that's easier.
All right. Well, I've got the main one, but I can fly to the tables easily enough. I just point out, first of all, in the introduction overview of forest yield tables, and it says they've been developed for use in British forestry. They present estimates of standards of growth and yield based on data collected by the Forestry Commission since the 1920s. So what I like to point out there is you're probably not going to get much more detailed information on how trees might grow than you are from that kind of experience. I mean, my initial thought of 8 meters high for a Scots pine was, well, I'd be very glad if my Scots pine grew to that height based on experience. I'm not saying it wouldn't necessarily happen, but I don't believe it's a particularly common occurrence. So I then direct you to the two tables, table 1 and table 2. Well, either is relevant really. This is from information garnered over many years, and we talk, the earliest stand age here referred to is 20 years, and the top height 8.1 meters after 20 years.
Okay.
Which seems more in accordance with my experience. So to boil it down, I'm just saying I think the year 15 visuals show a very optimistic tree growth. Not outside the bounds of possibility, but maybe not, I'll say, realistic in inverted commas.
Okay. Ms. Morrison, do you want to come back on that, please?
Yes. I think it'd be helpful for me to explain how the forestry specialists provided us with the data that we've used for the visualizations. They have used two different pieces of software. One is called the Forest Researchers Ecological Site Classification Decision Support System, bit of a mouthful, but in effect that is a PC-based software that enables them to tailor indicative species mixes to site-specific conditions, so that you're identifying species that are appropriate to the site rather than trying to make the site, well, the reverse, really modify the site to suit. It also enables key factors to be matched, so it uses MVC data, so National Vegetation Classification data, which the ecologists provided for the project, and it uses these to identify suggested mixes for the 3 different types of woodland that's been proposed, and enables predicted yield classes to be generated. They then used a second piece of software, which is again, it's from the Forest Management in Britain, Forestry Commission 2016. So in line, I would have thought, with the guidance handbook that Dr. Wimble has recently provided us with. So they've used the combination of these two tools to provide a site-specific model for us based on densities which are 2 meter spacing, so not the 1.4 meter spacing as identified in table 1 of Dr. Wimble's extract from the handbook. I understand from speaking to the forestry specialists that no one really plants at 1.4 meter spacings anymore, and that for forestry it's more akin to 2 meter spacings. So they generated through these systems heights for us to use. So we wanted the visualizations to be as accurate as possible in terms of the way they were going to depict the forestry. We've used different tones in the visualizations to try and show the difference between the areas of productive native woodland, predominantly Scots pine, against the areas of native broadleaf and mixed native woodland planting. So even if you were to consider that these heights are optimistic, what they don't change is the assessment findings, in the sense of the assumptions behind our year 15 assessment of effects. The woodlands will be established by that stage, in the sense that they will be providing an integrating function in the landscape. So they will be at such a growth height and density that they will provide landscape integration. So the development will be integrated within the immediate landscape and within some views. And irrespective of whether there's a dispute over some of the heights that are shown on the visualizations, it doesn't undermine the approach and the consideration taken, which is that by 15 years of growth. And indeed, in some areas, as were discussed by Catherine Anderson on Monday's hearing session, we've got areas where there will be advanced planting, which will be commencing from the early stages of construction. Indeed, potentially they could commence from pre-construction, which would then assume by year 15, that would be a 20+ years of growth that you would be achieving. I think it's important to also remember the focus here perhaps has been on Scots pine, given the evidence from the Forest Yield Handbook, and that it's the area of productive native woodland planting, which is identified on figure 12.6, which is ILI 9.888.
Thank you. Okay.
So it's a purple toned area. I realise there's quite a lot of colours on this plan, but it's a purple area, which is a productive native woodland where there's likely to be an 80% Scots pine percentage in the likely mix. All the other areas, indeed the native broadleaves, will have no Scots pine within its species mix. The mixed native woodland will, but a very small percentage of 10% or so. And I'm really in line with this. The outline landscape and ecological management plan identifies these potential mixes, identifies key species within these mixes. So one of the conditions, condition 30, I understand, would provide the landscape and ecology management plan to be detailed in line with the forest plan, which I think is condition 31. Both of those would work in tandem, and they would develop species mixes which may differ in composition a little to those that have been shown. But the purpose of us using species we consider that would be key species in those is to try and provide as accurate as possible a reflection in our assessment and in the visualizations of the type of woodland that could be achieved.
Dr. Wimple, do you want to come back on that at all? Anything further?
Well, I think now you have more information as to how the visualizations, or at least the information that went into the visualizations, has been produced. But it was my initial reaction to think that perhaps there was a fairly ideal world version of tree growth in that location.
What's the date of the Forest Yield document? Just the Forestry Commission, is it dated?
2016.
It is 2016.
It's based on earlier documents. Obviously, they've been measuring since the 1920s. So.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, the data. Yeah. Okay, there was a further question flowing from this, which was, I think, probably raised by yourself, Dr. Wimble, in your submission, in a number of different places, and it was really, we're going to touch on this a little bit later as well. And I'm conscious that Ruth Morrison just referred to the Catherine's evidence on Monday, where she was talking about advanced planting. So I'm taking all this into account as well, and what's already been said to me. But there was a point made about the effect of tree growth after 15 years. So, you know, I think I've got a question later on about why the particular periods were used. We can pick that up later on. But what would be the likely effect of tree growth after 15 years? And how has the assessment considered that? So I'm directing that to you, Ms. Morrison.
Okay, thank you. I think it'd be useful to have to hand for all parties our recent ILI 9.95, which is the markup that we've been referring to.
That came through on Monday.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1 second. Okay.
Okay. Well, it's the experience of our forestry experts that, based on their native woodland creation and forestry work they've done over many years, that they would expect after 15 years for a woodland to be what they would consider to be well established. And the detailed planting design and will enhance that topographical diversity through the site with open space, with species mixes and planting density, which will create a woodland mosaic. And that will have a multitude of stem heights, crown spread as well within it. So that in particular will help to screen, or at least partially screen, linear features within the landscape that would otherwise become more prominent without that. It would provide, as I mentioned before, we consider integration of the development into the landscape and into views, and this would be enhanced by the early planting that could be achieved. And I'll just take people through that again, because I think that would be helpful for Dr. Wimble's benefit to be aware of the areas where we're able to propose some advanced works. So the area identified as number 1, this is an area which is also identified in the landscape and ecology management plan, and it's an area of existing woodland, existing native woodland, and this would be fenced early on in the works. Obviously the section that's going to be directly affected by construction operations will be out with that, but the large majority of that will be able to be fenced, and there will be active management of that area of woodland, which will involve introducing some additional native species, management of the woodland, removal of or predating herbivores, which are currently a real problem with this part of the native woodland. So that will allow from really early on this better establishment of this band of native woodland extending all along the loch shore there, and part way up the sides of the side of the landform as well. The second area relates to adjacent to the B&B, and this area will be creating landscape earthworks, earth funding, with planting on top, and that will help with a degree of screening for the B&B during construction, but more importantly to provide an earlier establishment of trees in that immediate area around the B&B. The third area are 2 large blocks of native woodland planting that are proposed. So those are entirely new. They're not affected by any of the construction work, so they'll be able to be, advanced planting will be able to occur in that area. So they'll have a substantial head start in terms of their growth and establishment, which will be visible from a number of locations within the immediate landscape, but also when considering views across from the other side of the loch. Area 4 relates to the realigned C1064. One that's going to be realigned as part of the early works during construction. There will be some earth bunds created along the side of it with planting on those. This will enable some degree of integration early on, and certainly at least establishment early on of along that road within the landscape. And finally, there's quite a large area which is denoted by number 5 on the plan, and that relates again to management of existing woodland, but creating a greater emphasis of native planting within it, managing the woodland again against herbivore predation, and creating a much enhanced native woodland block to the northwest of the head pond. These will be, all of these areas, as I mentioned before, could be or will be detailed up in a forest design plan and the landscape ecology mitigation management plan, conditions 30 and 31.
Dr. Wimble, have you got any comments you want to make with regard to what Ms. Morrison's just said there?
I have a couple of comments. I mean, obviously, if planting is introduced earlier, it will have had a greater amount of time to establish and grow to the kind of heights shown in the photomontages. That is where it has been planted earlier. I mean, I assume that the last planting that would be introduced would be that is closest or on the earthworks of the head pond itself. So that's the planting that would have the latest start. And yeah, I suppose the other point, which may come up later in relation to the viewpoints, but I think it's very important to ensure that what woodland screening can be retained from existing woodland when it protects views from properties or other sensitive locations should be retained. I mean, it's been my experience in large infrastructure projects that with the best will in the world, sort of large scale plans showing things like this loss of woodland means that when contractors come in, the whole lot gets wiped out, whether it really needs to be or not. So were the scheme to go ahead, it'd be very important to focus on the detail of retaining areas wherever possible.
Ms. Morrison, could you just confirm the point made there by Dr. Wimble, but also the earlier point he made about the last planting will be that which is closest to the head pond? Is that correct?
Yes, I mean the last planting is likely to be the areas that are the last going to be disturbed and finalised in the construction works, and those will be around compound 1 and also along the head pond embankment. However, elements of the head pond embankment will be progressively constructed, so there could be no reason why, for instance, in the northwest end, where there's a large part of landscape embankment, why that once works have finished there in constructing it, why the planting couldn't commence. And I share Dr. Wimble's concerns and experience on large-scale infrastructure works and removal of trees. And just like to identify that there is a condition that relates to an appointment of a suitably qualified landscape architect who would be involved in not only approving and commenting on the detailed designs as they progress, but also through the construction period and early stages of operation. So there would be the ability for a suitably qualified landscape specialist to have advise or over those operations. I also, incorrectly mentioned that the Landscape and Ecology Management Plan, in fact, is condition 31. Apologies, and therefore the forest plan is condition 32.
31 and 32. Yeah. Okay, I'll just correct that from earlier. 31, 31, 32.
And so there's really just in summary, there's the ability through these conditions and the forest plan to secure the type of planting that we want to see and that we've advised should be proposed, to have a mechanism over how it's implemented and when, and also in terms of securing that the appropriate quality of planting is introduced.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move us on to the next series of questions. And this is looking at the visualisations, and there's been some criticism, I think, made by the Highland Council of the rendering of the visualisations in relation to the head pond earthworks and embankment. And I think this is viewpoints 2, 7 and 11, perhaps, that are being referred to here. And this is, I think, taken from paragraph 4.3.33 of Dr. Wimble's submission. So I just want to explore that a little bit more and just understand how far the visualisations do actually depict the visual impact of the project from these particular viewpoints. So I will ask the applicant to just explain their approach to that, and then ask Dr. Wimble to maybe come back on that if that's okay. Ms. Morrison.
I think it's important to note the visualizations aren't a measure per se of visual impact, and GRVIA under paragraph 8.16 notes that predicted change must be described in the text and also illustrated by means of visualizations of how those changes could start to appear. It also states in 8.23 that they are a tool designed to assist in, to allow interested parties to understand the changes. So I think that context is important when talking about visualizations and how they're to be used. The visualizations were produced accurately and conform with both Highland Council guidance and SNH's guidance. The rendering of them, we try and match as closely as possible to what we'd consider based on adjacent vegetation conditions and what's being proposed. So even if there's there's obviously a degree of subjectivity in how you render that form of vegetation and proposed form. What isn't in dispute and where there's no subjectivity is in actually the construction of them. So the wire lines that underpin them, and that technique is used to actually accurately show the development. So it accurately shows the extent of the head pond, the height of the structures, the location of the buildings at the tail pond, for instance, and in compound 1. So there's absolutely no dubiety about the technical production of those physical development elements within the visualizations. So it's really, it seems to me that it's a rendering, the colouring of the year 1 and year 15 in terms of vegetation that's perhaps being challenged, and we've used as much, we've used looking at the existing photography that was captured, existing vegetation colours, and we've tried to provide as close a indication of how these forms are likely to appear. It is a balancing act. We don't want to overplay it. There's a risk if you try and make it too seamless that it looks like we're trying to hide parts of the development and make it look better, if you like, than it might otherwise be. And so we've really tried to achieve a fair balance in showing as accurately as possible what the development is going to look like in terms of its physical extent and built form, and then how the proposed mitigation in terms of landform, but also the proposed planting could appear. Just to refer also to the FEI Appendix F, I think it's important to be aware of those visualizations which show the modifications in the landform and also the reduction in height of the intake-outtake structure, which aren't apparent in the initial set of visualizations that were submitted as part of the application.
Yeah, is this the structure that's been reduced in height? Is this it's a few different terms referred to? Is this, it's gone from 5 meters down to 4 meters? Is that the structure you're talking about?
It was originally 8 meters.
Okay.
And so this is a structure at the head pond that initially on the visualizations you'd have seen protruding. It was originally 8 meters. It's been reduced to 4 meters in the FEI, as well as the additional landform modifications, which helps to screen, also from certain views, screen views of it as well, or from other sides to provide a backcloth to those views.
The visualizations, I appreciate there's some produced in the FEI, but the visualizations, the original visualizations are based on an 8 meter, is that correct? Okay.
That's correct, yeah. I think it's referred to as a head pond inlet outlet structure.
Okay. Dr. Wimble, you raised this as a bit of a concern in terms of the way that the rendering is coming across in the visualizations. Do you want to just highlight where it is you think that's maybe it doesn't come across particularly clear, and what it is your concerns are?
Yeah, could I suggest you go to viewpoint 7?
Are we using Highland Council or SNH visualizations? Which ones are we looking at?
I'm just using the SNH visualization.
Viewpoint 7.
11.24, year 15, well, both year 1 and year 15.
115, okay.
But perhaps better illustrated by year 15.
I'll get both of those up. Mm-hmm.
And when you're there, I'll explain my point.
I'm there, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
If you have it blown up 100% on your screen, that's probably helpful. So you can concentrate in on the detail around the head pond. Really, it's just if you look at the elements of the base photograph there, you can see there's sun and shadow picking out existing trees and undulations in the landform, and the rendering of the site itself appears very flat, and I would argue quite recessive. And that's the point that I wish to make, that perhaps more could be done to integrate it into the lighting conditions of the baseline photograph, as well as obviously showing trees and landforms and so on.
All right, okay. So your point is that it just, yes, the relationship between the base, I'm just looking at the baseline pictures as well. And then year 1, and then year 2. Okay. And how does this affect the impression that someone gets of this particular viewpoint then of the development? What are your concerns?
Well, only perhaps that it doesn't really pick out the detail. I mean, it's a similar thing in viewpoint 2. It's just I mean, it is a matter of, I suppose, how much time you spend on these things, but the colouring and the line and shadowing on that area doesn't seem to relate particularly well to the baseline photograph. And I felt that it looked recessive, so that perhaps if the sunlight was on it, then it might be more noticeable from that distance.
You think it underplays the impact a little?
Well, that sounds like intention, and I'm not sure that is the case. Well, I'm sure that's not the case. I just think it hasn't been done as well as it might be. Okay. Most of the other ones I don't particularly have an issue with. And the only other point I wanted to make was to do with the SEI images, which obviously the applicant has pointed out that they were effectively provided for information as opposed to a completely accurate depiction. And there, I would just say that if you were to look at those, the overall mess of, you know, construction and contractors' compounds and vehicles and so on is not really as prominent as it would appear in reality. I mean, the problem with photomontages is always that they're never going to be like reality. You always, when you go to a site, you always prepare yourself with a photomontage to say, I suspect the effect is going to be slightly up, or, you know, a notch on what I've seen on screen. Mm-hmm. And it usually is. So those are the points. I mean, fairly minor points, but I don't disagree that obviously the assessment has been carried out, and the description in the assessment has detailed what the effects would be, and that's all done to a professional level.
Okay. Ms. Morris, do you want to come back on that?
Just briefly to say that considerable time was spent in the production of the visualizations. We all know as landscape professionals how these are scrutinized through the determination process. And we spent considerable time trying to ensure we could present the most likely depiction of the development, and particularly the way the planting, forestry and woodland is hard to really, I think, achieve particularly well in visualizations. And we certainly spent time trying to differentiate between the types of woodland that were being proposed, to help everyone understand the mitigation approach as much as possible, and to depict how the development would appear in these views. We certainly, I can confirm, did not on purpose try and underplay any impact in these. Our desire was to prepare visualizations that were accurate and as representative as we possibly could. Just touching on the SEI images, the construction visualizations, it's correct, they were prepared subsequently. They weren't prepared to the full set of guidance. They've been requested by councillors in particular to understand the type of construction equipment, kit if you like, that would be on site at different points during the construction period, at the tail pond as well as up at the head pond. That's exactly what we tried to do. What we didn't do was to identify all of the, as Dr. Wimble correctly points out, all of the other construction paraphernalia that you would expect to see on site, from vehicles moving between the locations, compounds with material storage, storage of vehicles, etc. So it wasn't that we were trying to hide anything there. We were purely asked to look at how the equipment, construction equipment such as cranes, could appear both at the tail pond area on the loch side and the kind of watercraft in the temporary jetty, as well as up at the head pond, with the likely cranes that would be used there.
Okay. Right, moving on to question 13. And we'll probably get through this and perhaps stop for lunch. We'll see where we get to. Viewpoints 5, 6 and 7 show the head pond being full of water, but I wanted to ask the applicant how likely it is that this will not always be the case. And I know we touched on the number of cycles that are potentially going to occur as an estimate that's been given. This was on Monday. So really, how has the effect of the drawdown of water in the head pond been accounted for in the visual assessment? So, you know, the changing nature of the visual impact of the reservoir and how it will appear. So I'll direct that to Ms. Morrison, please.
Okay, so as was discussed on hearing session 1, the frequency of the drawdown of water will be dependent on many varying factors. Number of cycles that could occur during the day maybe go from none to several. So, and those cycles, the drawdown of the water could result in the drawdown being in the morning, so visible obviously during the day, but also in the afternoon and evening where it clearly wouldn't be, particularly during winter months, wouldn't be visible. This change in water level is apparent from viewpoints that tend to be in more elevated locations. So viewpoints 2, 7 and 6, particularly viewpoints 6 and, well, sorry, viewpoints 5 and 6 in particular, and potentially also from viewpoint 7. And we considered this in our assessment. So when we're on site in particular and using the combination of visualizations and standing at these locations, we looked at how that change in water level could change your perception of the head pond within the landscape. The head pond will be lined with a asphalt concrete liner, so will be a dark color in terms of the lining of it. So as the water is drawn down, it will reveal a darker surface behind rather than seeing the water body itself as the water level moves down and then back up again. it won't have the strong, I thought this was important to point out, a lot of reservoirs that you see in Scotland are natural reservoirs which aren't lined, and you get that distinctive scour line, I think it's often termed, around them, where you distinctly see those different fluctuations in levels. You won't get that to the same extent here because it is going to be lined. There will be some marking undoubtedly from the changes in water level. So all of these factors were taken into account in our assessment, and we specifically refer to them for viewpoints 5 and 6. Now for viewpoint 7, if we look at the visualizations, you have a slightly different, you can still see the water body, but you're not looking down into it in the same way. So whilst I agree that you will see the change in water level, those fluctuations over periods of time, we didn't specifically state that in our assessment, but that's not to say that it wasn't considered as part of the understanding of how the head pond is going to work and how the water levels might or may not be observed depending on the time of day and the frequency. In the main, the water in the head pond will be at its full level, other than on those occasions where it's drawn down, it will then be drawn back up to reach that full and complete level. The other point from viewpoint 7 is that the landform modifications shown in the FEI will, to a certain extent, help to break the line of the crest line, really, of the head pond, and so on some occasions along its line will provide some degree of partial screening of that change in water level. So really it's about the determining factors, I think, really are your angle of view towards the head pond, and where you're looking down into it, it will be more apparent than the other viewpoints where you're looking across, and you're looking across at the crest of the head pond opposed to into it.
Dr. Wimble, do you want to comment?
Well, I think Ms. Mauritson has given a fuller explanation there. It's really, as we say, it's viewpoints 5, 6 and 7. And I suppose if we go to the visualization for viewpoint 6.
1 second.
For both years really, year 1 or year 15, but maybe it's better shown in year 1 because you can see the earthworks. But the drawdown would, if you like, underline somewhat the artificiality of the pond. I mean, I understand obviously that it's not going to be drawn down to its full extent all the time, but I mean, presumably when this was designed, there was knowledge as to, or an estimate as to how often and how much it would be drawn down. So a more accurate depiction might have been to have shown it drawn down somewhat. And obviously it's going to be fairly critical as to what colour the liner is. And, you know, as for the time of day that it's drawn down, well, you know, if you're looking at that site at night time, then you're not really going to be able to see your feet either. So I'm not sure that's a particular distinction. We're interested in what it looks like in the daytime in a reasonable case scenario.
Ms. Mauritson?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Apologies, I've had to change headsets. It's not working. Exactly. You're not going to be up on the hill, but what the during the hours of darkness, or indeed climbing back down the hours of darkness. The point being that the drawdown will be at different periods of time during the day. It's not always going to be during daylight hours.
Okay. Right, we've just reached the point in the questions where we could go on to the individual viewpoints. I think it might be a good idea to perhaps just have a break now and come back and deal with that and work our way through the viewpoints so I can understand parties' positions on each of those. Does that sound reasonable at this stage? And it's a little bit earlier and I was thinking to finish for lunch. Or do you want to touch on one or two of these viewpoints before we stop? What's the general feeling, Mr. Armstrong?
Yeah, Ma'am, I think it would be easier to start after lunch. There is, I understand, an issue with Zoom just now. I had for about 5 minutes, as you probably heard. I couldn't quite hear everything, and I understand it's an issue at Zoom rather than connections, and it eventually flashed up that I had to sort of re-enter, and I think Ruth has now got that similar problem as I had, so I think it's something you've got to then re-enter, put your Zoom code in to get back in. So I think it would probably be for technical reasons as well, as we've got through, I think, quite a lot this morning, and I think we are probably ahead of schedule and sort of timing.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable. I hadn't appreciated I noticed there was a little bit of technical problem. Everyone was still appearing, so I wasn't sure what the issue was. Mr. Finley, are you okay with that? We'll just finish now and then resume back at. I'm wanting to resume back at 2 o'clock actually, because I have something on to just do at 1:30. So and it would just give us a nice good break, and then we can spend a good bit of time this afternoon. Does that sound reasonable?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, perfect. Right, I think we will stop it there, and I will see you back here at 2 o'clock. Again, you'll need to keep everything switched on, but if there is any problems, we can obviously have a little bit of time just to get anybody who's having problems getting reconnected, and I'll have a chat with Callum to make sure everybody's back on when we restart. Okay, so I'll see you at 2 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, we'll just pick up where we left off, which was moving on to question 14. And this is starting to look at each of the individual viewpoints. Now, I have listed them all. I appreciate there may be some areas of viewpoints then visual impact that is in agreement between the parties, but I just want to run through each one if that's okay, so that my understanding of each one is correct. So what I'm going to do is take you through each one. Viewpoint 1, which is the bed and breakfast location. So first of all, I'm going to ask the Highland Council, Dr. Wimble, if you could just highlight to me which aspects of this particular viewpoint, if any, that you disagree with in terms of the visual assessment.
Well, I'm broadly in agreement with visual assessment for construction and year 1, and that we both find it significant. I'm suggesting that it tends towards the major rather than the moderate significance for year 1 because of all those sort of tree tubes and fences and so on that would be visible. I understand, obviously, that the inlet outlet structure would be largely, if not wholly, screened, but that would then mean a higher embankment. And I've felt that certainly looking at year 15 and taking into account the higher embankment, there may still be a moderate significant effect left, although I'm prepared to concede that as the trees grow and the vegetation matures on the embankment, that might not last forever. So that's essentially my position in a nutshell.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Ms. Morrison, do you want to comment on any of that? Let's get the applicant's position on this. We don't have any audio, I'm afraid. We can't hear you.
Is that any better?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, apologies. Sorry, yes, viewpoint 1. I think there was confusion because in the SEI summary table, it had incorrectly suggested that we had reduced the effects so they weren't significant. That was an error, and I identified that in my rebuttal, but that wasn't actually correct, and that we're in agreement with Dr. Wimble that there would be, for viewpoint 1, moderate adverse effects after year 15 as well, and those remain significant.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, can I just raise another point while
Yes,
we're on this viewpoint?
Yes.
In fact, it's almost a question to Ms. Morrison, really.
Raise the question to me and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah. If you go to year 1 and you see, well, in fact, first of all, go to the before photograph, the current conditions, and then scroll down to year 1. And what has been shown in year 1 and obviously retained subsequently is an existing embankment and mature woodland vegetation. And obviously these things could get lost in scale, but I got the impression that all of that would be taken out and replaced by a screening embankment. So I wonder how much this photomontage actually represents what would happen in reality. Would that vegetation be retained on a bit of embankment, or would it go and be entirely replaced?
Okay, Ms. Morrison, do you want to come back on that?
Yes, certainly. I think if you refer to figure 12.5, which is the development felling plan, it indicates the areas of forestry that would be felled. And there is a small section along the boundary line there of the B&B that would be retained and that won't be removed. And alongside that, there would be the additional bunding and additional planting that would provide a further buffer for them.
Sorry, maybe I just didn't see the detail at the scale of the drawing.
Yeah, that's okay, Dr. Wimble. I think it is, as you can see on the felling plan, a small section that isn't going to be removed, that isn't red, and it's that's been shown in the visualizations as remaining.
That answers my query.
Okay, I'm just going to note that down. Okay, moving on to viewpoint 2. And this is the viewpoint from Abri Aken, which is representative of, no, in the assessment, it's been representative viewpoint of residential properties. There's a number of residential properties that exist in that small community that extend up the hill as you travel on the other side of the loch. So first of all, I'll go to the Highland Council. I think there's a reference here in your submission, Dr. Wimble, that the head pond from this viewpoint will be fairly prominent. And I think we touched on this earlier on. So do you want to take me through your views on that one?
Yes, well, I think there is a material difference noted between us, not for construction and year 1, but for year 15. So I'll just dwell on that. And my feeling is that the embankment would still look fairly artificial in shape and appearance, just seen from that height and that location. I think it's really a matter of how much you think the woodland vegetation is managing to break up the landform. But if I compare that with the pre-development photograph, I feel there would be quite a sort of bold top there. And it's really a matter of how much you think that would be noticeable as being something different to the surroundings. So I think I've hedged my bets there that I think that might remain significant.
Okay. Your suggestion is it's moderate adverse in that particular period remaining significant, yes?
Yes, yes. It would obviously not be as intrusive as the earlier years.
Yeah, yeah, the construction phase particularly, I think.
Yeah.
Ms. Morrison?
I think, as Dr. Wimborne suggested, is a difference in professional opinion here on judgment, which there inevitably is quite often in a landscape and visual assessment. By year 15, I'd consider that the extensive native woodland planting would be integrating the head pond structure into the landscape and thereby into the view. The planting will have established a point that it will start to integrate the other buildings and features into the view, including the battery house at Compound 1 with the green roof that was identified in the FEI. The planting as well along the head pond embankment where we're able to plant will have started and will have had a integrating effect, screening certain elements, sections of the head pond, which would take away from what Dr. Wimborne considers is a significant level top landform. The sections of the embankment that we can't plant will have had a highland grassland seed mix applied, which will have had an integrating feature by year 15, along with different ericoids would have planted, which will influence the texture of the structure so that it will appear less of as a uniform engineered embankment, which combined with the effects that the landform modifications will have will further assist in the integration of the head pond in the view from this location.
Certainly from this viewpoint as well, we're seeing the head pond, tail pond structure. So I'm just looking at, make sure I'm looking at the right one, year 15. So that would be visible at the top of, but obviously these visualizations that I'm looking at are a structure at 8 meters. Is that correct? Yeah. So
yes, that's correct.
Mm-hmm.
So if you compare them with the ones in the FEI from this viewpoint, so one of the revised visualizations prepared in the FEI is from viewpoint 2, and it shows how the landform modifications combined with the reduction in the head pond inlet outlet structure will mean that it won't be visible and certainly won't be appearing as prominent as it is in these visualizations, and will in effect be screened by the landform and the reduced height. And yes, the tail pond will be visible from this viewpoint as well, depending quite where you're positioned on the hillside. Actually depends to the extent that you see the tail pond on the loch. By year 15, there's quite a substantial amount of native woodland planting proposed around the loch shore there that will be established. and will help integrate the buildings that are associated with the tail pond on the loch side to be integrated within the view.
Okay. So I'm just working my way through each of these and just capturing everything while we're looking at these individual viewpoints. Okay, thank you. Dr. Wimble, is there anything further you want to say about viewpoint 2 before I move on to viewpoint 3?
I assume we'll be coming back to the cumulative impacts later.
Yes.
So I'll miss out on that.
Yeah, I'll cover that separately.
Well, perhaps one clarification. It's difficult to tell from the FEI whether the inlet-outlet structure would be completely screened or it would still be peeping over the top of that landform.
Ms. Morrison?
Yeah, if you zoom right in on the visualization on the screen, you can see that the landform will be designed so that it does screen it. Clearly, depending exactly where you're standing on the opposite side of the loch and your exact eye line in relation to it, that will change as to the extent. But the landform's been designed so that it will screen the structure.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. All right, viewpoint 3. This is Loch End. Now, from my reading of both parties' positions, there's no material difference in the assessment at this viewpoint. Just going to double check what conclusions are reached. Dr. Wimble, is there anything you dispute in terms of viewpoint 3?
There's no dispute really. I suppose I could just go back to a previous point about how the methodology is applied, and I made a point here about taking into account that this is a high sensitivity receptor, and therefore with a medium level impact, you would, or I have decided the effect would be moderate to substantial for the earlier phases. And I suppose also about the position of the viewpoint, in that it is representative of residential properties, but I think the residential properties are more squarely facing onto the site than that viewpoint, from having been there. That is the properties that can see it. assume that you've either been there or will be going there.
I have been there, yes.
Yeah.
The viewpoint's taken, I presume it's taken from the beach, is it, at Loch End?
Yes, it's taken. There was a level bit of slipway in front of one of the properties that we were able to position the tripod on. So we had to find a location that we were able to do that, and that wasn't obviously on private property and was on, you know, publicly accessible location. So we tried to find a location that was representative of views from these properties that have views looking across and down the loch.
Okay. Ms. Morrison, any views on Dr. Wimble's comments there?
Just to say that whilst he's suggesting that the effects at Operation Year One might be moderate adverse, he concludes that he doesn't consider that to be significant, which is in alignment with our judgment that at Operation Year One, also minor adverse, that's not significant either, and that our consider there's no material difference in our findings, and that any difference in these nuanced judgments is due to differences in professional opinion that we've already covered.
Okay, thank you. Okay, viewpoint 4. This is off the Minor Road. Yeah, Midtown, just up at that top of the loch, isn't it? Looking across, that we looked at this morning as well. Again, Dr. Wimble, I think your concerns really are in the longer period, year 15.
Yes, that's the case. I feel that, and now I understand, obviously, in the FEI may have modified this view to an extent, though I can't tell because I don't have it. That level slope that comes in, and I think it's probably best to look first of all at the current view.
Okay.
And then you'll see on the right hand side of the picture, the slope tails down and you can see hills that are on the other side of Loch Ness. They become permanently partially blocked by the new embankment, and that embankment remains by year 15 at that end as a fairly level, intrusive, slightly unnatural looking feature in my opinion. And that's why I've decided that should remain significant, because it doesn't look like the vegetation is going to screen that in the long term.
I'm just looking at the visualizations for comparison. Okay, Ms. Morrison.
Yes, I think if we look at that exact comparison again, it's just a small end of those hills that can't hear.
We can hear you fine.
Oh, sorry, someone in the room's telling me they can't. Yeah, sorry, looking at the landform that's visible in the view, there's a substantial part of the hills beyond that remain visible at year 15 and indeed at year 1. And it's just the very end of that line of landform that's visible in the backcloth of the view that is partially obscured. So the majority of the hills remain in view. The characteristics of the view, which are views which take in Loch Duntellcheck, the extent of existing forestry remains in the view, and the views to the hilltops, both as you see in this visualization and also when you're standing there, you will see there are other hills that form to the further to the south of Loch Duntellcheck, which remain prominent in the view. And it is that the head pond from this location, once certainly by year 15, once the vegetation, the planting has established, extends the existing forestry that's already there in the view in a rather natural form as a natural extension to it. So it is just this small part of the horizontal extent of the view that will remain, seeing this section of the head pond embankment. And that in that case, we consider that, looking at the view as a whole, that it's not a significant long-term residual change, and that it is only indeed a minor adverse and what we'd consider not to be significant.
Dr. Wimble, anything to add?
Well, only that I consider it, certainly in the visualization, it looks a bit of a wall. And can I draw your attention to, well, first of all, I'd like to underline that people using that area would be traveling along the road. So if you were traveling towards the small settlement and the electricity line and the site, it would be more in your field of view than if you were just standing there as the person taking the photograph of the view. So you'd be seeing that end. And then finally, I'll ask you to open THC2, photograph 1, which is just, and we'll probably be coming to this later anyway, it's just a view a little bit further along that road where it opens up more.
The first photograph.
Yes, that's right. So it's 100 or 200 meters further west.
And that was taken to be more representative of people travelling in that direction. That's what that's for, is that?
Yes, and to show the properties that are arrayed along the edge there. But that's something we'll come to later.
Yeah, we can pick that one up later. I've noted to have a look at those as well. Okay, thank you. Right, I'll move us on to viewpoint 5.
Sorry.
Oh,
Mum,
do you want to, sorry.
May I just, yes,
Yeah.
sorry, just very briefly. I'd just like to point out the properties are very clearly visible in the viewpoint that we've chosen. I agree that you could select a viewpoint along that section of road that would be representative of users of it and the views experienced. Clearly, we need to select a point. We chose one that that was safe, obviously, to erect the tripod and to take the photography. We could have taken it further along, as Dr. Wimble has done. We were trying to ensure that we captured the extent of a head pond in the view as well, so we weren't too close to it, whereas it would you wouldn't understand quite the setting of its relationship within the context of the view. And yeah, that we obviously agreed all of these locations with Highland Council and SMH.
Okay, thank you. Okay, viewpoint 5, this is the Trail of the Seven Lochs. So this is a representative of kind of recreational routes, I suppose, as well. And I did walk part of this. I did walk through to the viewpoint, which I did manage to identify eventually. It was quite tricky to pinpoint exactly where that was, but it appeared to be a kind of break in the trees, and there was a view across. So the views on this, opinions on this particular one, so there are no material differences in the assessment at this viewpoint. That's the applicant's summary. Right, okay. So in the construction phase, I think there's some agreement there'll be some moderate to major adverse impacts, but not significant in the longer term. Dr. Wimble, have you got anything you want to say about viewpoint 5?
Well, that's an example of a location which I felt had a higher sensitivity than medium because of its recreational potential, the nature of the users. So my assessments were probably slightly higher, but not enough to make a material difference in that by year 15 we're both agreed it's probably not significant.
Okay. Ms. Morrison, anything to add to that?
No, not really, thank you, other than just to explain that it took us a number of times walking along the route to try and find a location in breaks in the forestry where you do get a clear view out. And as you'll have experienced walking through there, there's a lot of forestry planting, and the route of the path takes you down different levels as well, so you have different experiences of that. So this viewpoint was just trying to achieve a representative view for users of this trail.
Okay. Yes, I wondered if you kept walking. I didn't keep walking beyond the particular viewpoint, a small way on, but not far on. You start to drop down, is that right? Because you reach a kind of high point and then turn and drop down. What more you would see from there? That's something I can have a think about.
Yes, I mean, I think it then starts to probably be more akin to the levels and angles you get from viewpoint 4.
Yeah.
So it's a different view of the head pond that you would experience. So you'd start to not actually see the water body. And I think that would be the difference in the visual experience.
Okay. Right, a viewpoint 6. This is another kind of higher point. Right. I think Dr. Wimble's views on this are in relation to cumulative impacts. I think you've raised, which we can maybe cover a little bit later on. But I know you raised certain infrastructure that might be visible from this viewpoint, and touched on this earlier. Do you have other concerns in terms of your views on the assessment?
Well, this probably more so than viewpoint 5 emphasises the somewhat unnatural positioning of the water body in a sort of counterintuitive position. I see in the montage how it kind of fits in with the pattern of water bodies in the area, but it really does appear to be perched on the edge of the plateau area above the broad glen in which Loch Ness is located. So that's the first point I wanted to underline there. And the second being that you can see to some extent, and I realise this may have changed in the FEI, but I don't have a visualisation, some of the unmitigated embankment slopes and angles. And then finally, this is probably the viewpoint over which you would see the drawdown more than any other viewpoint. And again, I gave this a slightly higher receptor sensitivity.
Okay.
As I think anybody that walked to the top of that hill would be going to appreciate the view.
Just a question, the recreational user of this particular route. Is there a recognised path that you can get to the top of this hill?
Well, I can recommend not trying the gap between the two rock faces. However, I couldn't see much of a path. There is somewhere, so obviously people do go to the top of the hill.
Yeah, I'm aware people have been to the top of the hill, and it wasn't obvious to myself when I was there.
It's not part of a recognised route unless Miss Morritson can, but it is a good viewpoint.
Okay, Miss Morritson, you want to come in?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky viewpoint to access. There's no doubt about that. There aren't. It is identified when you look online to try and find hilltops in this part of the study area, and it is noted as one that can be achieved. It doesn't give a clear guidance how to do it, so it's certainly probably akin with Dr. Wimble's experience. It's one of the more challenging routes to try and access. But we felt it was important to include because it's a viewpoint that gives you an expansive, it's a panoramic viewpoint, it's expansive in its nature. On a clear day, you have very extensive views, and I know this is going to be touched on later in terms of cumulative. But it's an important one because there aren't many that provide you with that orientation and that elevation and looking towards the head pond. And that's why we felt it was important to include it. And it undoubtedly provides a context of the wider landscape character and the interfaces between the different landscape character types and the predominance of large water bodies in the landscape. And irrespective really of the formation and of the structure, I think it's clear from year 15, and we both don't disagree over this, that the effects won't be significant on this view, and that the planting does an effective job on integrating what could be otherwise considered at year 1, the more engineered and artificial profiles, into one that is more integrated into the landscape and into that view. And it is only one element of a panoramic 360-degree view that you experience from this viewpoint.
Okay, thank you. Anything further, Dr. Wimble, on viewpoint 6?
I think really the cumulative aspects, which we'll touch on later.
Okay. Right, viewpoint 7, which is another hill and recognised recreational route, and up near the Great Glen Way. I don't think there are significant differences between parties on this one, but I will just check with you and ask you individually. Dr. Wimble, on viewpoint 7.
The main difference between us is that I would give this a high sensitivity, given the popularity of the Abriacan trails and the very scenic nature of the viewpoint. You know, unlike the other viewpoints, there were people coming up and down this when I went there. Okay. So that's probably elevated my assessment slightly, but I think at this distance and this angle by year 15, assuming the trees grow reasonably, it wouldn't be significant.
Ms. Morrison?
Yeah, I don't think we're in a disagreement over the assessment findings.
Okay, viewpoint 8, which I hasten to add, I did not get to see. I did not get on any boats and look at this particular one, but I understand there's no material difference between parties on this one. Dr. Wimble? Can you turn your audio on, please? You've not switched your audio on.
No, there's no material difference for this viewpoint. I think that I make the point later on that obviously a watercraft on Loch Ness could have many different viewpoints.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Morrison, this viewpoint was picked for what reason? This particular location? Do you accept there are other, obviously, particular locations that could have been taken?
Yeah, I accept that. You could, if you could position yourself on a watercraft at any position in the loch, that would be possible. We were rather reliant on the watercraft that used the loch, and we went out on a watercraft that one of the tourist ones that do the route down to Urquhart Castle. So in that sense, it was representative of views that would be experienced by tourists, users of the water. That's the best we possibly could do in terms of selecting a viewpoint on the loch, and therefore we were restricted on the route that that we were taken. So there will obviously be varying experiences and varying views depending exactly where you are on the water body.
Okay.
Viewpoint 9, of course, is from Urquhart Castle, and that then gives you another experience from another part of Loch Ness.
Mm-hmm. Just further down, yeah. Okay, moving on to viewpoint 9, which is Urquhart Castle. Again, I'm not noting any significant differences between parties on the assessment here. Dr. Wimble, anything to add on viewpoint 9?
No, I don't. I was unable to visit the castle because it was closed, but there was a place near the visitor building that you could get a similar, somewhat more restricted view.
Ms. Morrison, you're in agreement with Dr. Wimble on this particular one?
Yes.
Okay. And viewpoint 10, which is the lay-by on the 82. I had a little bit of trouble figuring out which lay-by this particular one was. I think I stopped at the first one, then the second, perhaps the third one, and it may have been the third one. I think I eventually realised that was the one. So from the viewpoint that's been taken, I think the opinion that Dr. Wimble has actually made is that there are a number of points along the 82 where people may stop. There are a number of different points, and it'll be both road users, but I suppose it'll be tourists visiting the area as well who will probably stop and look across. Dr. Wimble, your points on this one, please.
Well, I think I felt justified in assuming that the people most likely to stop and appreciate the view here would be tourists, and therefore they would have more than a medium sensitivity. Like you, I think I visited most lay-bys on the way down, so there are several opportunities to see this or something similar. I would agree that you would be of a medium sensitivity if you were simply traveling the road to get from A to B, both because you would be looking ahead and not obliquely, and also because you would be screened or partially screened along a lot of the way. So bear in mind, my assessment is based on a more sensitive receptor than was assessed in the EIA. And I feel this is another one of these viewpoints from which the landform may appear in the long term rather unnatural, even allowing for the modifications.
Just a second, I'm just getting these viewpoints up for viewpoint 10. Okay, right. Right, Ms. Morrison?
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of things I'd like to come back on. There are a number of viewpoints, laybys along the A82, and the reason I can only imagine is that it is obviously of interest for tourists to stop, because large sections of the A82 are actually screened with vegetation that prevents views across the loch, and that is why we've chosen a lay-by. We looked at a number of them and tried to choose one that would have the most obvious views across to the development, looking at the head pond and the tail pond features, so that we were trying to find, if we could, a worst case scenario along the A82 where people would stop and experience the view, which is of course as much across the loch as down the loch as well. I mean, irrespective of our judgments of sensitivity are in line with our approach and our methodology, where we've consistently applied them. But irrespective of that, I don't think Dr. Wimble, I disagree in our judgments at construction or at operation year 1. So it's only at year 15 where we differ. And the native woodland planting will do a lot to integrate the development around the tail pond. So the tail pond is obviously, you're both at a similar level on the loch when you're standing there. So the integration of the woodland planting will assist in assimilating the structures that you see at year 1 into the view by year 15. The head pond structure itself, the modifications that we've identified and talked about previously in the FEI, will not only reduce the height of the intake-outtake structure, which on these visualizations that were submitted with the application, you can see it against the skyline. It will be the landform will help to screen that, so you don't get that same hard built building edge appearing prominent on the skyline as these initial visualizations suggest. And by year 15, as I mentioned previously, where the areas that we can't plant on the landscape, on the embankment structure of the head pond, the grassland mix will have established, and you will have the differences in texture, color and form, which will help integrate what would otherwise appear to be an engineered form, and really integrate this structure with our landform modifications and planting into the landscape. You also see from this viewpoint the extensive native woodland planting, which is proposed and that will be established during the early construction works. And that's further, really kind of above the tail pond area. You can see there that the woodland planting will extend and add to the qualities and characteristics of the view. And as such, we don't consider there to be a significant effect after 15 years.
Dr. Wimble, anything to add?
Well, I simply think it's a matter of how successfully one feels the combination of woodland vegetation, seeding and masking of the engineered landform would be, as to whether you think it's successful or not. I think in that image you see quite a long level landform that doesn't quite have the natural flow of the rest of the slope or the horizon.
Okay, thank you. Viewpoint 11. Which we touched on earlier in talking about the scheduled monuments, so there's probably very little to say here, but I'll just open it up for comment if anybody wants to add anything. Dr. Wimble, do you want to say anything about viewpoint 11?
I don't really have any comments to make.
Okay. Ms. Morrison?
I've nothing to add either.
No, viewpoint 11. Yeah, thank you. Right, moving on to kind of further assessment that's in the environmental report, and where further assessment looks at settlements. Now, some of these are represented by viewpoints, but there's further assessment made of the settlements as a whole, other recreational routes, and other roads. Comments under the settlements, and I'll come on to ask specifically about residential amenity and how that's been considered or how it's been dealt with in the assessment. But in terms of settlements, Abriacan, we've touched on in terms of the viewpoint. Is there anything from your point of view, Dr. Wimble, you want to raise with regard to the settlement as a whole?
Well, as you mean as a subject, as opposed to an individual settlement. No, I think my comments are more specific.
Okay. I think your comments in your hearing statement, you say, I consider effects on Abriacan more would be higher than assessed in the FEI operation years 1 and 15, remaining significant in the long term.
That's based on viewpoint 2.
Okay, so that's actually relating to viewpoint 2. Okay,
yeah.
That's fine. Thanks for clarifying that. And then in terms of doors, significant effects on doors are unlikely. However, during construction, activity on Loch Ness at the Tailpond site will be visible from the beach just northwest of the village. And I think that's photo 2 in your submission. And possibly increased water and occasional land traffic passing the village. So do you want to just elaborate there in terms of your concerns at that particular location? Sorry, your audio is not on, Dr. Wimble, we can't hear you.
We could go to the viewpoint in THC2.
THC2, yeah, of course.
So that's taken from the beach, maybe 100 meters up from the village, and it's obviously a very popular place. I think I felt that perhaps this should have been shown as a viewpoint, even if just to show construction activities. I know Miss Morrison makes the point that there is a fish farm there already, which would lie just in front of where the tailpond works would be. But given the scale of the construction works there and the possibility that there may be traffic coming across from the Caledonian Canal, I think that there may be a possibility of visual impacts during the construction period at least.
Okay. Ms. Morrison, do you want to come in?
Yes. Our viewpoints are representative. I'm not suggesting you won't get views from anywhere else. And funnily enough, we also took a viewpoint just like Dr. Wimble's as part of our baseline analysis when we were initially trying to decide exactly where to position the representative viewpoints. So we have one that exactly mimics that. And the reason why it wasn't carried through and through discussions with Highland Council and SNH was because it would be exactly that. It would appear there would be effects experienced or changes to the view as a result of construction works around the tail pond. However, it was considered by everyone that the viewpoint 10 provided a better representation of the full extent of works that would be being undertaken at the tail pond, rather than using a viewpoint from the beach at Dawes, which would concentrate on purely construction effects.
Okay, thank you. Recreational routes. We've touched on the Trail of the Seven Locks and part of that route that weaves its way through. And there's the from the Great Glen Way as well, which the viewpoint 7 is very near to that. Is there anything else anyone wants to raise in relation to recreational routes on that particular? I'm just checking to see what's been said at this stage. Dr. Wimble, is there anything around recreational routes you want to add?
Well, only that I feel they would be a higher sensitivity than medium. And I think there are also recreational routes following the road on the south side of the loch.
Can I just ask your reasons for the higher sensitivity than medium? Just explain that to me.
Well, two reasons. One being they are either within or looking at the designated landscape, and secondly, the nature of the activity, which is recreational walking or cycling, where I think the landscape and views would have more importance than just a medium transit type importance.
Okay. Ms. Morrison, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, I mean, we consider that we're looking at our approach and our methodology, that those recreational users would be of medium sensitivity. What I'd point out is that actually, regardless of whether you consider them to be medium to high, that didn't change the differences in our opinion and judgment on effects for that viewpoint, for example. We both consider there's no material difference in our findings.
Okay. And then we've talked about various roads. We touched on the A82. Remind me, the C1064 is the road. I think I'm just looking at the photographs that you've put in to us, Dr. Wimble. Could you just highlight to me, is that the road that goes from north to south? So it would be looking from the top above the proposed site, looking down south towards the site.
The C1064 is the one that's actually diverted, but it also extends north and south of the site. And yeah, if you look at photograph 5 in THC2,
okay. Yeah.
This was another location which I felt would have filled in a gap in the representative viewpoints, in that we don't really have any from the north looking over the flat moorland plateau like this, and especially by Loch Ashie. You can see just to the right of Loch Ashie the kind of bulge of forestry, which is approximately where the head pond site would be. And I think the works would be quite prominent there, and possibly the landform, depending on how successfully it was screened by landscape landforming and vegetation. But otherwise, I think we're agreed that there would be significant effects on, via viewpoint 1 and viewpoint 11, we're agreed there would be significant effects at all stages.
Ms. Morrison?
Yes, as part of our initial baseline analysis, we've travelled all along that road and tried to identify where we thought the most appropriate and worst case potential view could be experienced, and that's why we we ended up plumping for viewpoint 11 on, which is in the opposite side to the side that Dr. Wimble's suggesting, because we felt that there would be more open views experience towards the head pond, and that would provide the most representative and indeed worst case view that could be experienced when travelling along the C1064. Again, through consultation, no other parties, SNH Highland Council requested another viewpoint along that section of road to the north. We obviously could have, in the same way, we could have added another 10 or plus viewpoints to our section, but the point of representative viewpoints is that they're to be proportionate, and we felt, and as did the consultees, felt that the selection of viewpoints we'd chosen provided a range of different receptors, a range of different views and a range of different angles of views to experience the development from geographically around it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that covers the majority of what I wanted to cover under those particular viewpoints, and I'm just going to home in on a couple of things. We've touched on these, to be honest with you, Dr. Wimble. It may be that I'll give you the opportunity to bring any further points you want to raise, in particular regard to TCO2, which is the document that you submitted photographs. Now, I think you referenced a more comprehensive assessment of specific receptors, such as some residential properties, recreational routes and roads, which I've listed below. I suppose we're really asking the question, how would Scottish ministers understanding the project benefit from any further assessment, which is, I think, is what you're perhaps suggesting. And if you want to highlight any of those in the bullet points below, then I'll obviously listen to that at this stage. So I'll let you come in just now.
So we're on question 15, yes.
15, yes.
Well, I suppose I'm used to looking at a lot of landscape and visual impact assessments, so I come in from that point of view and see where I think there's a gap in this particular assessment. And I understand it's all been discussed with various regulating bodies and so on, but here I am making these points. And first of all, residential properties are mentioned, but apart from the two sets of properties, or the one property and then the small settlement, VP1 and VP2, none of the other potential effects are looked at in any detail, although it is conceded that there are probably some properties which would have long-term or permanent significant adverse effects. So I felt it would have been useful to look at properties in particular around Midtown and West Town, immediately to the east of the site. Also the properties on the B862, which is the road that climbs up the hill from Dawes. They're kind of bisected by the temporary access road and one of the construction compounds. So I feel there might be effects there. And then finally, the B&B that's on the south side of Loch Ness along the road that is also happens to be a trail and a national cycle route. So I've illustrated some of these in THC2. Just in the order that they are, we've seen photograph 1 already.
Mm-hmm.
There's a number of properties along there. Now, some of those properties are probably going to be screened by the retained forestry. Other ones that are set further back from the forestry, I believe, would see the works and some of the head pond embankment in the long term. So there may be significant effects there. It would have been nice to see an assessment. Then going down to viewpoint Sorry, to photograph 3 or 2 photographs there, that's from travelling northeast along the B852, and that's going past the entrance to the B&B, which would be off to your left, and then towards the end of the property, looking over a field to a line of trees, which currently are shown as likely to be felled as part of the works. Now, that's something that no doubt could be picked up in the detail were the development to go ahead. But I'm really making the point that there are effects, there would be significant effects at both of these viewpoints that might have benefited from a further assessment or photograph or visualization.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Morrison.
Yes, Dr. Wimble refers to many other landscape and visual assessments. I suspect, although not knowing, that a lot of those may well be wind farm related, and where you do then typically within a 2-kilometre study area go into quite a lot of detail about views from residential properties. But again, that's a different form of development. We haven't. We agreed the approach very closely with a lot of discussion with the Highland Council landscape officer, who was very keen that we made sure that the assessment considered the way people use the landscape and move around it. And that's something that we tried to do in the way that we selected the viewpoints and the way that we discussed the visual impacts associated with the different phases of the project. She was satisfied with that approach and did not at any point require us to look at specific properties. Nonetheless, going through the properties that have been identified by Dr. Wimble, the ones at Midtown and Westtown are almost all generally orientated towards Loch Duntelcheck and the landform beyond. That's of course not to say they won't have some views from around the property or from back windows, but in the main they are orientated with a view across the loch, and that looks like it's a primary view. I mean, it's a private road in part going down there, so difficult to fully understand. And as again, I haven't done an detailed assessment of visual effects from any of these properties. This is just my suggestions from reviewing them and looking at them and some analysis. Balnafoig is a property that is mentioned, which again is off the B862. It will have, I suspect, views during construction of certainly the upper parts of cranes down at the tail pond, as well as potentially some vehicle movement passing further down the slope as they move along the temporary access road. Upon operation, the tall cranes won't be there, and they are unlikely, especially once the substantial bands of native woodland planting that's going to be enhanced from early stages of construction that I mentioned earlier, that will have had added time to establish further and provide a fuller native woodland planted area. I suspect their views would not be significant in the long term. There's another property, Park, that is mentioned by Dr. Wimble that would have views during construction. It's actually owned by the landowner, and it's a tenant that's in the property currently. And the B&B down at the loch edge, we did look at possibly having a viewpoint along here. We were mindful that it would be helpful to have a view given the tail pond operations here. But again, it was very difficult to find a location that was safe to stop and actually take the photography. And there's substantial planting. Certainly, if any planting is going to be removed on that edge, it will be reinstated. And in the landscape and ecology management plan, there's a drawing in that shows the extent of the planting proposed around the tail pond structures. Again, the B&B property there is orientated, as you can imagine, with its primary views overlooking the loch because of its lochside location.
Dr. Wimble, anything further you want to say?
No, not really. As I say, I came in as a fresh pair of eyes, so I suppose it's encouraging to see that Miss Morrison had looked at some of these points, but had been advised that it wasn't necessary to illustrate them.
Excuse me. Just on question 16 now, just asking a very direct question really of Dr. Wimble. Is it the suggestion of Highland Council now that a residential amenity assessment should have been undertaken? Is that what I'm getting from the submission, or is that too strong a suggestion?
That's possibly too strong a suggestion, in that I was more interested in just the landscape and visual aspects of amenity. I suppose I'm kind of surprised that the property next to Viewpoint 1, I think certainly if it had been on a wind farm project, it would have had a full RVAA undertaken, given its proximity and the changes that would happen very close to it.
Okay. Ms. Morrison, do you want to come in there?
Yes, I mean, only to say it's not a wind farm project, and no one has requested that we undertake an RVAA at any stage, and not even through this period of appeal.
But how has the impact on the property at Viewpoint 1 been considered? Could you just set out for me what happened?
It's been considered as part of the assessment for Viewpoint 1. We couldn't obviously access the immediate grounds of the property, so we stopped at a lay-by passing place as close to it as possible, so that we could understand the relationship between the development and the property. The property has a number of views around it. It's set in quite extensive grounds. A lot of the primary views are actually to the southwest, across towards Loch Ashy and the scheduled monument. It does have views towards from the gable end and from the side, but they're currently towards obviously the forestry, so you can see why they've chosen to have primary views orientated away from immediately the stand of commercial forestry. That's not to say that they won't, as we've assessed, have views of the head pond in the long term. And that's why we were particularly keen to ensure that there was some degree of additional mitigation proposed around the B&B. So that's the earth bunds and the planting associated with that. And also that includes the planting across the road that's immediately in front of them. Now, the realigned road, of course, will take traffic away from running past their property. It will then be diverted, so they won't, the road will be purely to give them private access to the B&B. So the additional planting and the earthworks was also to help screen views to the east from their property, so ensuring that we were trying to cover as much as possible to assist with screening early early on, and also progressively as the development through the operational period. But like I said, we haven't undertaken an RVAA. Is obviously a very separate step to the landscape and visual assessment. And it looks from the actual property itself and takes into a number of different other factors and considers things, as I'm sure you're aware, of being overwhelming or intrusive, or and that is a stage we haven't done and we haven't been asked to do, so that's really why.
Okay, thank you. Anything further, Dr. Wimble, on this particular matter?
Well, only really, again, considering the property at Viewpoint 1, yes, I understand that the best distance views are away from the site towards the hills in the south, but I would say the overall ambience of the setting is one of being sheltered in maturing or mature woodland. So and it would be a very big change when that's cleared away to the north, in fact on two sides, and a very large earthworks project is initiated. So I would certainly be concerned if that was my B&B.
Okay, anything further from Ms. Morrison?
Just briefly to highlight, there was no objection received from that particular property in question on residential amenity.
But there was an objection on other matters?
Yes. And sorry, I can also add that it's been resolved.
Right, okay, we've come to the end of that particular section. And now I have a couple of proposals for you. We could take a small break and then resume and carry on and move on to some of the cumulative impact discussions. Or we could finish for today and start again tomorrow. I'm easy either way. I will take the advice of everybody that's here in terms of how comfortable you feel continuing on this afternoon. Or whether you feel that you need to have a bit more extended break. Mr. Armstrong, how do you feel about carrying on afterwards or reconvening tomorrow?
Mum, I think it's really up to the witnesses. I mean, how they feel. I mean, they've obviously both been speaking for quite a long time today, but I'm happy to leave it obviously up to the witnesses. But we have got quite a long way through the evidence, the various topics so far.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Dr. Wimble, what's your preference?
Well, if having a short break now and then carrying on meant that we are actually able to finish today, that would be a bonus, I think.
Yes, we might not finish though, that's the only thing. Maybe that we come back, got a very small, and I don't want to, I'm very conscious that I don't want to work people too much and try and finish in one day when and extend people's voices too long. But I hear what you're saying. Ms. Morrison, how do you feel about continuing?
If we continue, I would certainly want a break, just to give my voice a break, if nothing else. But I would also, if we're going to tackle cumulative, I'm aware that that will be quite a discussion we're going to have between parties, and I would want us to be able to conclude that rather than have that spreading over onto another day. So in that sense, I don't know if it's a cleaner break to stop now and say, okay, tomorrow we will tackle cumulative and the remaining questions. I don't mind trying to, I can't judge how long our discussions on cumulative assessment are going to take. I do know that from reading, obviously, Dr. Wimble's statements, that this is one area that may take a little bit longer.
Yeah, that's generally my feeling as well, that perhaps it might be quite a detailed session and we wouldn't want to interrupt that. If everybody's agreeable, then I think Dr. Wimble, you were nodding there as maybe that's a suitable way forward as well.
Well, I think the most important thing is either all or nothing. So better nothing and start tomorrow. Okay,
right. I'll take that as finishing up now. And we'll meet again. We've got an early start tomorrow at 9:30, so I'm sure we've got enough time to get through everything tomorrow. And we will just finish up here for today. So thank you very much, and I will see you all again tomorrow morning at 9:30. Thank you.
Thank you.